Good evening, everybody. This is Radio Free Mormon broadcasting behind enemy lines. This is episode 410 of RFM, The Trouble with Temples. Well, Kolby Reddish, my esteemed co-counsel, and I are back in the saddle again and writing herd on Austin Fife's Light on Truth letter. We're up to chapter 10, which is titled Something About Temples and Ancient Connections, where Austin seeks to bolster our faith in the Mormon temple and the endowment by making comparisons with the ancient world and avoiding, at every chance he can, avoiding any connections with Masonry. Well, we're going to supply his deficit tonight. Let me first welcome on the stage. There he is. There's Kolby Reddish, everybody.
Hey, RFM. Good morning.
I'm pausing for the applause.
Oh, perfect.
So anyway, You're looking great. By the way, you put this together, and I want to put this up here so everybody can see how clever this is. It's The Trouble with Temples. It is responding to Austin Fife's chapter 10, Temples and Ancient Connections in the Light and Truth letter. That's what he calls it. We call it the Light on Truth letter. We'll let you decide which is the more appropriate title. And we have also supplied his deficit in giving chapter numbers to his chapters because they don't have any numbers. So we're numbering them, so hopefully you can find them better. Chapter 10, Temples and Ancient Connections. It's been several months since we were together. Glad to have you back, Kolby. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing well, RFM. Excited to get through this book, I think is what we call it nominally.
Yeah, and today's going to be so great. We got 90 slides, but we're going to go through them lickety-split. Believe it or not, we will not be here for 4 hours. We're not going to break our record on this one. This is a promise I'm making to you and to myself right now. These are great images. What are these images that you came up with of you and me, Kolby?
Yeah, I just took a screenshot from one of our recordings and asked my little AI friend to make us Lego, and I thought it was adorable.
Well, I think your little AI friend, I don't know. I think it's kind of got less hair on me even than I have, and it's got more hair on you than you have. Is that fair?
That's true. When I did, I think when I texted this to you, you asked me about, hey, why did it make me have less hair? And I did run it back through, but it gave you way more hair. So
I want your hair.
Yeah.
As long as this can be designed. By the way, I also like how I'm in my office. There's the sign. There's even that little green light over there that occurs sometimes. That's amazing. And you're in your bedroom, and it even shows the mirrors on the ceiling.
I didn't
Did
even
you notice that?
No. But
thank you. There. It's what you try and hide. It's why you've moved your camera down ever so slightly so we can't see your ceiling.
Yeah. Thank you for drawing attention to those again. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Well, I didn't really do it. Mr. Lego, your friend did. So we've got a whole bunch of slides to go through. And you had made some slides there at the beginning, which we decided right before the show would be extremely effective as a conclusion.
Yep.
So let's go ahead and let's see what it is that Austin Fife has to say in his chapter, Temples and Ancient Connections. First off, he starts off with questions and concerns. He gives a couple of quotes that he's going to riff off of that he found somewhere on the internet. But he starts with this story, okay? This story that shows us how much the temple means to him, or at least how much he's going to present the temple as meaning to him since the time he was a little boy going there with his mother. And can you read this? And I think this is important because it sets a tone and lets us know the bias that he's coming at the subject from.
Yeah. Before I read that, one signpost that you and I discussed, and I wanted to get out right here at the beginning before we start, is especially in the ex-Mormon space, sometimes when people talk about temples, they can do it in a rather mocking type of way. And we're going to really try and not do that. So we will discuss certain things that folks hold sacred, and we're really going to try to treat it as respectful as we can while also still doing our regular analysis of really taking Austin's claims and evaluating them. Is that fair, or do you want to say anything more about that?
Thanks for bringing that up. That's important. Let me end because you and I are both simpatico on this issue. We're not here roller skating in temple robes.
Right.
Okay, that's just not what we do. We're not out displaying temple garments or anything like that. What we are going to be showing, let me back up and say, and consistent with that, we're not going to be doing anything like that tonight. We're not going to be talking about anything that Elder Bednar has told us we're not supposed to talk about in the temple. We'll try and be very gentle. If you've been to the temple, you will know We will talk more specifically about things that have been in the temple but are not in the temple anymore, because obviously, you're not going to know what happened before 1990 if you haven't been to the temple before 1990. And that's
Right.
when the penalties got thrown out. So we'll talk about those as well. But when it comes to what's going on in the temple, I will try and be as gentle and discreet as I possibly can, because I agree that if other people think this is sacred, then I want to respect that.
Yeah. And so, in the spirit of that, I'll go ahead and read Austin's opening thoughts. It says, "My first time going to the temple as a 12-year-old is a memory I will never forget. Sitting in white, I sat in the baptistry with my mother, taking it all in. For a period in high school, I would go to the temple by myself monthly to sit in the small forest on the Seattle temple property. That was a great comfort to me. When I received my initiatory, I felt like an army of temple workers were there
Can I
just
ask
for
you
my..."
something, Colby? I
Sure.
know we have a long show and a lot of slides to get through, but what does that look like? I mean, Austin Fife there's a little forest on the property and he goes and sits in it. That just seems unusual.
Yeah, that does seem unusual. I mean, I definitely understand going and walking the temple grounds. I wouldn't say I would do it all of the time, especially when I was in high school, but I can understand going and finding peace in those locations. They usually do a really good job with the grounds, keeping them up. So I've never been personally to the Seattle temple, so I don't know what it looks like there. Have
I don't
you
know if he
been?
drove there to sit in the forest or if his family was looking for him and didn't know where he was. But he
Yeah,
but he definitely, the point is he had a positive experience. He has positive feelings
yeah,
towards the temple.
yeah. So he says he felt like there were an army of temple workers there just for a special day. My sister-in-law gave me good advice for the endowment. Just relax, take it all in, and enjoy the experience. So I did, and I loved it. Through different seasons of my life, I have been to the temple more often and sometimes left less often, but it has always been a place of contemplation and peace.
Okay, so now we've established the bias of the witness, by which I mean that he's going to look at everything through a very, very temple positive lens.
Hmm.
So now he starts saying, well, critics, though, these critics, they say the temple is different than the way I experienced it.
Hmm.
Critics emphasized to me how strange our temple is and how jarring it was going through for their first time. Now, I think Austin would understand both of these things can be true. He can have a good experience. Other people can have a not so good experience, and they can both be equally valid for the people, right?
Yes, and since we've done a good job in this series of talking about different logical fallacies, I just want to say that fallacy is what's known as the fallacy of composition and division. It's where you either take a discrete experience and try and apply it to the whole incorrectly, or vice versa, where you try and take something that's true of the whole of something and try and make it true of just a part of it. And I actually think it's the most common fallacy we see used on both the pro and ex-Mormon side, which is people presuming that their experience is representative of the whole. Because what you said is exactly true, and it's the response to the use of this fallacy. People can have different experiences with the temple, and both of them can be true at the same time. People can have bad experiences and good experiences with bishops, with local leadership, and both can be true at the same time. But I think a
Very
lot of
good.
times people struggle to see that.
Thank you very much. But he says they mention how boring or pointless the temple ceremonies are. None of this troubled me much. So, what did trouble you, Austin? Here it goes. It wasn't until I learned about the parallels between the temple endowment and Freemasonry that I felt unsettled. Now, the balance of his chapter is going to be spent showing how it is that Austin resolved these negative feelings that suddenly he feels about the temple because he learned about the parallels between Freemasonry and the temple endowment. Now, it's interesting that even though he says that he felt unsettled by it, so obviously these parallels were sufficient to cause him dissettlement, right? Or unsettlement. He's not going to talk about or detail any of those
Right.
parallels in the rest of his chapter. Instead, he's going to downplay and diminish those parallels with Freemasonry, and he's going to try and focus on parallels to the ancient world
Right.
in favor of Freemasonry. So he starts off with Freemasonry. Can you read this?
Yep. Joseph Smith became a Freemason on March 16th, 1842, and introduced the Temple Endowment on May 3rd, 1842. Similarities and many differences exist between Freemasonry and the Temple Endowment. Critics claim that the temple endowment came into being only after Joseph Smith became a Freemason. Well, I mean, that's
a fact.
just factually true.
Yeah, I mean, critics. Yeah, go ahead.
According to
However,
what
it's the meaning that he is going to imply into this.
Yeah, I do think it's just interesting how Austin constantly engages in these fallacious shifts of the burden of proof. And you can see it right there. Like his own chapter just said factually that the temple endowment came into being only after Joseph Smith became a Freemason. It's like he didn't actually think through the sentence all that well. I know what he means. He's talking about that critics basically claim that Joseph Smith pilfered everything from the Masons, and he disagrees with that. Anyways, I'll finish with his inane question, which is, if that is true, then how do the critics explain the following?
Right. And we'll get to the following here in a second, because now he's going to start flailing.
Yeah.
Okay. So the main thing is March 16th, 1842, Joseph becomes a Freemason. That's the day before he organizes the Relief Society, right?
Mm-hmm.
On St. Patty's Day. So the day before he's made a Master Mason on site, he gets introduced to Freemasonry. Then a little less than 2 months later, on May 3rd, 1842, he introduces the Temple Endowment. So the first thing that Austin Fife is going to do, the first mistake or second or third mistake he's going to make so far, is he's going to say or imply strongly without asserting it that Joseph Smith could not have known anything about Masonry or its symbols prior to becoming a Freemason on March 16th, 1842. That's the first thing that he's going to be going off of. Do you want to say anything about this before we go on?
Well, I would just say that only makes sense if you know nothing about 19th century history, early 19th century history. And I know we're going to go through that. The other thing I'd say is that St. Patty's Day is March 17th. So you were off by one day. But that's
I meant to say the day before. Did I not say the day before?
St. Patty's Day Eve. That's right.
Yeah, the day before St. Patrick's Day. The day before he organized the Relief Society on that year, 1842. He was a busy guy. I'll give him that much. But now when Austin says critics claim that the Temple Endowment came into being only after Joseph Smith became a Freemason, well, it did come into being only after he became a Freemason. But what he means by that is that, well, critics say that because critics say this is so difficult, because the fact is that Joseph Smith became a Freemason 2 months before he gave the Temple Endowment. Therefore, he's limited to that time period to come up with the Temple Endowment. Mm-hmm. If indeed he's deriving it from Freemasonry. That's the box he's trying to put the critics in. Whereas, once again, it's the same kind of box that that faithful Mormons or apologists try to do with the Book of Mormon and say, well, Joseph Smith didn't really start even working on the translation or the conception of the Book of Mormon before April of 1829, at least for the Book of Mormon as we have it today after the 116 pages incident. Of course, that's ridiculous. He had years in which to formulate these ideas, and the same with Freemasonry. Mm-hmm. So at any rate, it's an important thing to point out because this is going to be one of his major lines of reasoning, if I can call it that. So now, having established this, he feels that he can controvert the critic's position, which is, by the way, a straw man. Critics claim that the Temple Endowment came into being only after Joseph Smith became a Freemason. Watch out, don't fall for a straw man fallacy, which refutes an argument by mischaracterizing it, which is what he's doing here. Mm-hmm. This is one of my favorites of the Upturned Microscope Presents Logical Fallacies in the Lab. Can you read this one? Can you perform this for us? I think it's great.
I will sure try. So presenting today, the straw man, misrepresenting someone else's argument to make it easier to refute. So we've got one character approaching another and says, and given my contributions to this paper, I think that I deserve to share credit with the first author. The second figure says, so fame is more important to you than science, huh? Well, that's sad. The first character then says back, what? I didn't say that. And the second character says, oh, so now I'm senile too.
That's the straw man. And when you see it like this, you've heard this 100 times. And 99 of those 100 times have been from Daniel C. Peterson. This is what he does all the time. All the time. Mm-hmm. That's how he responds. So fame's more important to you. Oh, now I'm senile. Okay, very good. This is what we're doing. Okay, so what Austin Fife is doing is he's assuming that Joseph Smith could have known nothing about Freemasonry until he became a Mason. Let's look at Wikipedia on this, okay? This is not really astonishing stuff. The relationship between Mormonism and Freemasonry began early in the life of Joseph Smith, founder of the Mormon Church, and includes similarities between Mormon and Masonic rituals, such as elements of the endowment ceremony and stories of recovered ancient records. Smith was claimed to have stated that Mormons had true Masonry. Yes, he did. Other leaders like Brigham Young said Masonic rituals were an apostate endowment. Yeah, the early leaders, and basically there were a lot of people, and pretty much all the priesthood leadership in Nauvoo ultimately were Masons as well. So they saw the connections. It was part of the deal at the time. It was a feature at the time, not a bug. It's become a bug over time.
I'm just struck by reading that phrase, true Masonry. I'm just struck by how often Mormonism requires one to claim to be the true something. So they're the true Masons. They're the true children of Israel. They're the true Christians. There's so many examples of this where Mormonism requires you to basically claim this position of authority in almost like in a no true Scotsman type way, right? They're the truest of the true.
We are true disciples of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, true messengers.
True messengers. Thank you. That's it. We are true messengers of Jesus Christ. Yeah, they do. And so, once again, Masonry was viewed by Joseph Smith and the early leaders as Christianity, which had been correct and pure and true in its original incarnation, but had become apostate and corrupted over time. And he's there to restore the original. So Brigham Young said Masonic rituals were an apostate endowment corrupted from the rites given in Solomon's temple that Smith had restored in its original form. Okay, now this is an important data point. Hence, in blue highlight, Smith's older brother Hiram joined Masonry in the 1820s. In the 1820s. Do you remember how close those two were? That's before the church is organized, before the Book of Mormon is written. And his father, Joseph Smith Sr., may have been one as well. The evidence, there's a name on a roll for Joseph Smith, but there's a lot of Joseph Smith, so it's not conclusive. So I put the word, or I think they put the word, may have been a Mason as well, while the family lived near Palmyra, New York. In the late 1820s, the Western New York region was swept, I tell you, with anti-Masonic fervor. Once again, in the 1820s, pre-Book of Mormon. By the 1840s, Smith and the most Latter-day Saints, including but not limited to many in church leadership, had become Freemasons and joined the Masonic Lodge in Nauvoo, Illinois. Soon after joining Freemasonry in March 1842, Smith introduced the temple ceremony referred to as the endowment, which included a number of symbolic elements that were very similar to those in Freemasonry. We'll see how similar they were. Smith remained a Freemason until his death, not that much longer afterward. Now, William Morgan, during the 1820s in the United States, actually, let's say in the United States, first off, the so-called secret rites of Freemasonry became subject to intense public scrutiny and opposition. This is a big deal, particularly in the wake of the disappearance of William Morgan. There's William Morgan right there, who disappeared, was kidnapped, and likely murdered in New York, in Joseph Smith's backyard, basically. He living in New York at the same time. And he was disappeared because of his promise to print an expose of Freemasonry with all of its secret rituals and rites. Freemasonry was experiencing significant growth and influence in American society, according to History.com. Many prominent figures, including politicians and businessmen, were Masons. There's a picture you can see. That's George Washington there, who was a Mason wearing his apron. This visibility, coupled with the secretive nature of the organization, led to public unease. Here we go. The Morgan Affair. Could you read this, Kolby?
Of course. In 1826, William Morgan, a former member who had planned to publish an expose of Masonic secrets, disappeared. Many believed Masons were responsible for his disappearance, fueling widespread accusations of conspiracy and corruption within the organization.
And by the way, here's the picture, right? This is the photograph. You can see the guy who's being forced into the carriage. That's William Morgan right there. That's the last anybody ever saw of him.
That's right. The public outrage generated by the Morgan affair directly contributed to the formation of the anti-Masonic Party. This party campaigned on a platform of exposing and opposing the Freemasons, believing that their secrecy posed a threat to American democracy and Republican values.
All right. So there's an awful lot of talk about Freemasonry, pro and con, and a lot of it's con going into the 1820s.
Right.
In New York and in the United States. Here's somebody who was a Mason at the same time. No, it was a little bit later. This is Harry S. Truman. Can you read this part too?
I can. Therefore, while the specific rituals and symbols of Freemasonry were technically kept secret, the very existence of these secret rites and their controversies surrounding them, especially after the Morgan affair, were certainly not well-kept secrets in 1820s America. They became a central focus of public debate and a catalyst for a significant political and social movement. And I'd really just underscore that this is what I meant earlier when I said this, Austin's argument is really only credible if you don't know anything about 19th century history. The fact that this was a very large political movement organized basically in response to this secret society, I think is something that really can't be understated. I can't think of another example where we had the formation of a separate political party that was opposed to something that didn't have really anything to do explicitly with the government, right? Many officers were Freemasons, many of the founding fathers, like you talked about, but I don't think it can be underscored how unusual this is. And the point being there is how much the average person would have been interested in Masonry as a topic, in these secret rites, in the 1820s, well before the 1842 timeframe that Austin's talking about.
Yeah, and of course, once again, one of the thinking errors he allows himself to slip into because it favors his argument is thinking that Masonry is this hermetically sealed bread box of Masonic things that exists in society, but nobody who's not a Mason who can get into the bread box knows anything about what goes on inside the bread box, when it's going to be everywhere.
Right.
At the time. So anyway, just thought I'd bring that up. Did you have any other comments about this?
No.
Okay. By the way, there's this the apron that Harry Truman is wearing. Apron is very much a part of the regalia of a Mason, and simply because a Mason would wear a leather apron over his loins, because when you're hammering the heck out of stone and chipping it right down there, and you got little shards flying off like shrapnel in all directions, you want to protect certain parts of your body. That's why the Mason wore a leather apron there, primarily, I believe. And of course, this was then changed by the Masonic society to make it more ritualized and ornamentation. So you can see this isn't really leather. And there's a number of symbols on it. Up there at the top, right above the fold, that's the all-seeing eye. And we'll see more of that eye later on.
Right.
Also, in addition to this, in a strange twist of fate, William Morgan, the guy who got disappeared, remember, in 1826, William Morgan's widow ended up marrying somebody else, converting to the LDS Church, and subsequently was very close to Joseph Smith and may have been his plural wife, one of his plural wives. That's Lucinda Pendleton that I'm talking about. So Joseph Smith has connections to Freemasonry all over the place. So here are some of the examples that Austin Fife is going to give now. Notice that his argument is based upon all of these premises that he has not established, that he has only assumed, and that we've already talked about.
Right.
So he says, if that is true, then how do critics explain the following? 20 years before he became a Freemason, Joseph Smith's first vision contains echoes and allusions to the temple endowment. That's allusions with an A, allusions to the temple endowment. I want to talk about this for a second, okay? Because the rest follow suit and are similar.
Right.
So he's saying 20 years before he became a Freemason. So in other words, 20 years before he got the knowledge of what's included in Freemasonry. It's all based upon that incorrect assumption that he wouldn't know anything about Freemasonry before he joined. Okay. In spite of his brother, in spite of probably his dad, in spite of one of his wives, in spite of everything that's going on because of the William Morgan affair in the 1820s, Austin proceeds with his arguments that are based on the assumption Joseph could not have known anything about it before March of 1842. Then he compounds his error by suggesting or repeating something that I find incredibly unpersuasive. And I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's toes here who does. But this idea that Joseph Smith's first vision contains echoes and allusions. By the way, echoes and allusions gives it away that these are not really even parallels. We can't even call them parallels. Right. They're echoes and allusions to the temple endowment. No, it does not. That's ridiculous. Only in such large generic ways as to be absolutely meaningless. And you could find similar parallels with anything else. I mean, we all know the accounts of the first vision. I think the 4 primary accounts, I know them very well. There's nothing about the first vision there. I mean, does God appear? Okay. Yeah, you got more? Do you know of anything else in those first vision accounts?
No, I think this will reveal kind of where we'll come back at the end of the presentation and my methodological point of how Austin's conducting this chapter. But what he's doing here by calling these echoes and allusions in these first vision stories to the temple endowment, he is skipping right past the much more obvious and direct parallels, the ones we know that Joseph Smith had access to. He's rejecting that category of evidence. And by that, I mean the link between Freemasonry and the temple endowment. And he's trying to create these other links that are much, much weaker, much, much more subjective, and also much, much less specific. Sorry, I was going to say specificity, but they have a lot less specificity. And what I mean by that is I'm positive if we looked up these echoes and allusions in this source, first of all, I can guarantee without looking at the footnote right now, I know it goes to either Fair Mormon or Scripture Central. Is that right?
I don't even know, because here's the thing. I have been an apologist for a long time. I still keep my finger on the pulse. I am aware of some of these studies, if I can dignify these researches with that kind of names, a study. This is nonsense, okay? There's nothing in the first vision account that would indicate that Joseph Smith already had the endowment in mind at that time, okay? Or that the endowment is sort of like this eternal thing that always exists that's showing up in different places even before Joseph Smith restores it or becomes a Freemason. There's nothing, though, no, not persuasive in the least, to me at least.
So I want to say I did look at all the footnotes before. I just couldn't remember off the top of my head which footnote this went to. This goes to a piece by Don Bradley on Fair LDS. So,
Don Bradley will find echoes and allusions to the temple endowment everywhere and behind every bush, as will be shown by further things that he finds.
Right. And I was just going to say, it would have been real embarrassing if I guessed where it was and it wasn't one of those, but I guess that's what happens when you look closely,
Good job. Don, if you're watching, I love you dearly, okay? And I love a lot of the things that you've done. I think this one is just not impressive to me, okay? It's just not persuasive. That's all I'm saying. All right? I know you've put a lot of work into it.
Don to be fair to Don, though, yes. RFM, I'm sure apologists would make better arguments if any existed.
Oh, I'm sure they would. Instead, we'll cite him for a proposition and not put the evidence up there because it's so bad. All right? Don is one of those guys who's so smart, I think he can see things that aren't there.
Yes.
And I mean that not entirely as a backhanded compliment, but he's very, very intelligent. All right, so that's based on Don Bradley. In 1823, he goes on, nearly 20 years, once again, before Joseph Smith Jr. became a Freemason. See how he keeps harping? He keeps beating this drum of this assumption he has yet to demonstrate. He first saw the plates. Joseph Smith Sr. reported to a non-Mormon friend, Fayette Lapham, which is, by the way, I think is it 40 years later? I think it's 40 years later. It's at least 20 years later. I think that's the name of the title it's from. It says like 40 years later.
I'll look.
He first saw the plates. Joseph Smith Sr. reported to a non-Mormon friend, Fayette Lapham, that the metal plates had a title page or cover page with the Masonic symbols of the compass and the square. Yeah, when did you hear that last? Probably never. Not in the Mormon church, because there is this very, very late recollection by Fayette Lapham of something that Joseph Smith Sr. allegedly told Fayette Lapham 40 years, is it 40 years? 40 years earlier.
He doesn't actually have a cite to the quote. He just has a cite to one of Don Bradley's books, the book he wrote about.
Oh, and I looked it up. I actually pulled it off the shelf and I looked it up. It's like 40 years later. Okay. At a minimum, it's 20. It's over there, and I put it back up so I don't have it here to grab. Anyway, a late recollection.
Regardless of how distant the recollection is, the bottom line is, when it comes to criticisms of Joseph Smith or criticisms about the plates, Austin doesn't accept this type of, secondhand hearsay account. This is one of the frustrations about this, is they'll pick whatever evidence they need to that supports the conclusion without any regard to how they've treated that category of evidence in the past, right? This is a secondhand, well, actually at best it's a third-hand account, because it says Joseph Smith Sr. reported to this Fayette Lapham. So Joseph Smith Sr., he would be getting his information from Joseph Smith on this, correct?
Unless he's reporting from, because he was one of the 8 witnesses, I think, as well.
Yeah, I just don't know if he would have seen the title page. I guess that's what I was thinking of, because it's specific.
I don't know, because that title page, it moves around. Here it's on the top where you would expect the title page to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
But according to the way Joseph Smith writes about it, it seems like it's the last plate at the bottom. In fact, he specifically stated that it was the last plate. Yes, I agree with you, Kolby, that under any other circumstance, Austin Fife would not be following this particular piece of evidence because it's late and it's so obscure. And I think it's unique. Nobody else reports this, and it's so unusual. And yet it helps his argument, he thinks, so he's going to include it here. Now, I want to mention that later on, we're going to find out the significance, whether it was Joseph Smith Sr. who saw the significance or it was Lapham. The significance is that my understanding is that in some Masonic ceremonies, they will take the Bible and they'll put upon it the tools, the compass and the square, on top of the Bible during a particular part of the ceremony. So having metal plates with a title page or cover page with the Masonic symbols of the compass and the square would make more sense within a Masonic mind frame.
Mm-hmm.
So the Bible gets used either for swearing on or for whatever, for putting these on, the compass and the square, which are symbols in Masonry, believe it or not. Those are the most well-known symbols of Masonry. Whether you're a Mason or not, you probably know about them because they advertise them on their jewelry, on the outside of their buildings.
Right.
Everybody knows about the compass and the square. But we didn't know that they used them. I didn't know that they used them inside as tools on top of the Bible. So we have the Bible in the Masonic ceremony being used as I don't want to say a prop, but a tool, part of the ceremony, which isn't that unusual. And yet you do remember that in the temple endowment, there are different books of scripture, including the Bible, that are used as props or as part of the ceremony.
Right.
So there's a similarity there, which would not otherwise be obvious. I'll bring it up now. Okay, so he also goes on 14 years before Joseph Smith became a Freemason. The lost 116 pages of the Book of Mormon translation had elements and indications. I guess that's like echoes and allusions. Elements and indications of the temple endowment. Now, this is remarkable because the 116 pages, the 116 lost pages are what? They're lost. So this is a highly creative sussing out, once again, by Don Bradley, and I have the book, of what might have been in the 116 pages based upon what the Book of Mormon may say and what others said about it. And from this, I think this is about as strong as any evidence in this list. Don Bradley has sussed out evidence which he thinks shows elements and indications of the temple endowment. Once again, Don, I love you like a brother, but I do not find this persuasive at all.
Yeah, and I think if people just take the words and they really think about how little evidence it would take to meet what's described here, So Jesus Christ, like I think Don's book is I think Don's book is highly speculative. I haven't read the entire thing, but the entire argument seems uh no offense, slightly ridiculous to me to argue
Whoa,
that
ridiculous.
that
They're just slightly ridiculous. So it's okay.
that someone can claim that they know what's in this lost document based on these usually late recollections of what was in there, and there's so many claims about it that I just think it's kind of ridiculous to use this. It's a highly speculative argument, but Austin's taking it at face value and saying
Yes.
the lost 16 pages had these elements in there. Let's talk about how simple that would be to satisfy. I guarantee that Jesus Christ is featured in those lost 116 pages. God is featured in those lost 116 pages. That alone could be argued to satisfy Austin's claim here that it had elements and indications of the temple endowment, depending on how you define all of those terms. In other words, this evidence is not at all impressive because its specificity in the things that are unique about the LDS endowment and the temple experience that aren't something you would hear in any Sunday service are not present in the lost 116 pages, nor are they present in the Book of Mormon.
So that everybody knows, we're not just going to talk in generalities about all these different nonsense allegations that he's making here. However, we will go into depth into one, all right, just to satisfy everybody that we are doing our due diligence, but we haven't gotten there quite yet. But now he goes from the lost 116 pages to something that wasn't lost, that we still have in the Book of Mormon, that you have probably all read, so you can make your own assessment on this. 13 years before Joseph Smith became a Freemason. See how he keeps hammering that home as if Joseph Smith couldn't know anything about Freemasonry before he became a Freemason. The Book of Nephi was dictated by Joseph Smith, containing elements of the temple endowment in Nephi's and Lehi's visions. Excuse me? So we've got the temple endowment in Nephi's and Lehi's vision in 1 Nephi 8 through 13. Let me tell you something. That is going to take a very, very creative reading of those chapters to squeeze the temple endowment into it. And just looking at that, I'm not impressed because I'm quite familiar with the content and there is no temple endowment in it.
Right.
Only in the most generic, self-serving kind of way could there possibly be.
Exactly. That's where you want to look at the unique elements. What are the things that are different about the LDS endowment and temple experience that you wouldn't hear in an average Sunday sacrament meeting attendance? Those are the things that we should be looking for if we want to actually find echoes, allusions, whatever word you want to use, it doesn't matter. Those are the things that we would actually be looking for if we were thinking critically, are those unique elements of the LDS temple experience, not the things that could be generalized to any Sunday service. You could say the same thing about any sacrament meeting, right? The Book of Nephi was dictated containing elements of the temple endowment. So he cites there to 1 Nephi 8 through 13. That's Nephi, that's Lehi's vision, and then Nephi receiving the same vision and describing it. You've got the love of God in there, represented as the white virgin and the mother of God. You could build all of this into your average sacrament.
That's like the temple endowment. We have a white virgin in there. There's a tree of life and glowing fruit in the temple endowment. I guess there is a tree of life, isn't there?
Yeah.
Aha! But I think I've stumbled upon one of the connections.
Fair.
All right. So
just shows how loose these hits are, right?
They're loosey, they are goosey. And, you know, they're so loosey and goosey, somebody might even try and say that there are elements of the endowment in King Benjamin's speech in the Book of Mormon. Oh, wait, that's his next one. This is the one we'll go into with a little bit of depth, just to have some fun. 13 years before Joseph Smith became a Freemason, the Book of Mormon contains highlights. I think that contains and highlights. No. Let's get rid of contains.
Contains highlights.
Highlights the elements of the temple endowment. Yeah, he meant to add one and get rid of the other.
Yep.
In particular, King Benjamin's address in the Book of Mosiah. So Mosiah 1 through 5, we've got this down. This is the temple endowment. Now, I'm going to let you notice how Austin, or whoever wrote this piece of drivel that Austin's quoting, takes things and from King Benjamin's speech. He knows what the temple endowment is, the person who wrote this. So the idea is now to take King Benjamin's speech and make the temple endowment fit it by hook or by crook. It's like putting the glass slipper on the ugly stepsister. That's what they're going to do because they're going to make it fit any way they can. And the first thing they're going to note is that King Benjamin's sermon was for those who had proven themselves worthy. Wow, that's just like the temple endowment. You have to be worthy to go to the temple. A new name, Mosiah 5:11 through 12. Now, note that the new name, by the way, I'm going to skip to the next slide because that will have it in there from the top. Oh, this is something where I'd mentioned the compass and the square are well-known Masonic symbols. It's on their jewelry,
Right.
as well as outside their temples, which are called temples too, by the way. And there's the square and the compass with the big letter G in the middle. Okay, so there we have it. These are the similarities. We're not going to go through each of them, but a new name. Now, go down there a little bit to 3 from the bottom where it says, taking upon us the name of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
It's the name of Christ in both places. The new name in Mosiah 5 is the name of Jesus. But in order to make it seem more like the temple, they're not going to include that. They're just going to say a new name at the top.
Right.
That's the parallel. It's supposed to make you think that King Benjamin's sermon is much more like the temple than it actually is. Because, of course, in the temple, we receive a new name, not Jesus, but a new name that is just specific to us.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
And
a
it's used later
completely
on
different. This is a completely different thing.
Yes.
This is what they do. They zoom out far enough so that they can call it a hit. I'll use the example of this, the one right underneath the new name too. A warning not to trifle with sacred things. Now, what would be impressive is if in Mosiah 2:9 it said something explicitly referencing the unique elements of the temple endowment, like the exact phrase, God will not be mocked. But that's not in there. Instead, it's just a general warning, right?
This is what it is. Mosiah 2:9. I looked it up. Where it says, for I have commanded you to come up hither to trifle. For I have not commanded you to come up hither to trifle with the words which I shall speak. That's it.
Yeah.
That's the warning not to trifle with sacred things. So you can see how hard it is. They're working to make the speech of King Benjamin match the temple endowment. And it gets better. There's a warning not to trifle with sacred things. There's a discussion of the creation, Garden of Eden, and the fall of Adam. We know that that's in both, but that's kind of a common theme of Judaism as well as Christianity. Rebirth formula, obedience. Okay. Obedience, sacrifice, those are unusual things. The law of the gospel. Well, he talks about Jesus, so that's good enough. Now, chastity. Let me see if we got chastity. Okay. So he's referring to the law of chastity from the temple, of course. Chastity, right. Mosiah 4:30. Let's see what that says. Can you tell us, can you read 4:30 for us? Because you can see how hard you're gonna try and make this match chastity.
But this much I can tell you, that if you do not watch yourselves and your thoughts and your words and your deeds, and observe the commandments of God, and continue in the faith of what ye have heard concerning the coming of our Lord, even until the end of your lives, ye must perish. And now, O man, remember and perish not.
That's it. There's nothing in there about chastity. And yet, we got to find something for chastity because we got the law of chastity in the endowment. So, damn it, this is as close as we can get. We'll put it down and we'll give it as a reference for chastity, Mosiah 4:30, and we'll call it good and hope nobody looks it up and talks about it on a podcast like we're doing right now. Then there's consecration. Now, also notice something, okay? Notice that this list goes through the endowment pretty much in chronological order, okay? Pretty much in chronological order, we're going through the endowment. But notice the references in King Benjamin's sermon. The first one is Mosiah 5, then Mosiah 2, Mosiah 5 again, Mosiah 5 again, Mosiah 2, Mosiah 3, Mosiah 4, Mosiah. In other words, it's obvious that we're cherry picking, that King Benjamin's sermon does not reflect the same order as the order in which these things occur in the endowment, which would have been more impressive if it had. Be more impressive if the verses actually talked about the things that they're saying they're talking about as well. But then we get the consecration, Mosiah 2:34. We got this one too. Oh, that was chastity. Here, can you read consecration? It actually almost hints at this.
I say unto you that there are not many among you, except it be your little children, that have not been taught concerning these things. But what knoweth that ye are eternally indebted to your heavenly Father, to render to him all that you have and are? And
Hold it
also,
there, because that's it. That's it. That's the consecration.
but if this is a hit for consecration, wouldn't Jesus's command at the end of some of the synoptic gospels to go and take neither purse nor script, wouldn't that also count as a hit? Really? I mean, this is part of the problem, right? Is if you use Austin's methodology, whether it's consecration or chastity, how vague the chastity reference was, you could then find legitimate hits all over all of the standard works. And
Yes.
that's part of the problem here is to make the argument he needs to make, he has to lower his epistemic bar so low that anything would pass underneath it, right?
Yes.
Like just passing trivialities are going to count as a hit under this methodology. That's the big problem here.
Back in the early 1990s, still an apologist, I realized that one of the things apologists do is they find established patterns in the Bible that scholars have noted and written about. Then they look to the Book of Mormon, and then they're going to cram. They're going to find that pattern somewhere in the Book of Mormon. They're going to write a paper about it. I still remember reading about these papers and looking at this and thinking, wow, this really seems kind of weak. Like when they're trying to find the Feast of the Tabernacles in the same sermon, by the way, there's a lot of stuff going on in King Benjamin's sermon, a lot of parallels going on there. And you read some and you go, oh, that makes sense. But then you read some others and you go, yeah, that's really weak.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that feeling of disappointment, even at the time. And I'm having the same feeling now. So you got consecration, then you take upon yourself the name of Christ, right? Which you never do in the temple, by the way. When do you take upon yourself the name of Christ in the temple?
I don't think that you do, as far as
No.
I can remember.
So what we're going to do is take something that does happen now in King Benjamin's sermon immediately after it's part of the story and pretend like it happens in the temple.
The only thing I can think of that he would use for that is one of the names of one of the tokens. Or one of the names of one of the tokens, I guess.
Oh, right. The Son?
Yeah.
Maybe, but that's not the name of Christ.
And that's not taking upon you it's not taking it upon you. It's a completely different situation.
Yeah. So once again, we see the slipshoddiness in order to make it work.
Right.
Now, here's my favorite, okay? Unified prayer is offered accompanied by a symbolic posture. Now, what he's trying to hint at here is the prayer circle.
Right.
In the temple. There's a unified prayer that's offered, okay? Because the person who's leading it says a sentence and everybody else in the circle repeats the same sentence, right? There's a symbolic posture that's being maintained by the people having to do with different signs and tokens, right? Okay, we all understand this. But he says this happens not only in the temple endowment, but also in King Benjamin's sermon, Mosiah 4, 1 through 3. The thing that's really interesting is that there is a unified prayer because everybody calls upon the Lord for mercy with one voice, right? They're not following somebody else, by the way, like in the temple
Right.
prayer circle, but they all cry unto the Lord with one voice for mercy, and then they fall to the ground as if they were dead, and that's the symbolic posture. Here it is. They had fallen to the earth. There's your symbolic posture, Austin. It just doesn't seem so amazing once you look it up and say out loud what it really is.
It's
the
also
symbolic posture is falling down.
This is also a patently ridiculous story, really, if you think about it. It's like the passage in the Gospel of John when all the Jews cry out saying,
Crucify
his
him.
blood be upon us and upon all of our children for all eternity. Like, there are some things you'll read in the scriptures that are obviously mythological, and this is one of those passages. Like, we're talking about thousands of people all at the same time falling to the earth and crying aloud in a 2-paragraph prayer. Like, it doesn't take a whole lot of skepticism to go, this obviously did not happen the way it was recorded. Even if we set aside all the questions of Book of Mormon historicity, just taking it from a literary angle, you have to understand this is mythology mixed with, at best, mixed with some factual core, right? This just doesn't happen. When have you ever been around thousands of people who did the exact same thing and said the exact same prayer with one voice? It says like it's
Well, at the temple, I guess, but that wasn't thousands of people.
right. And you weren't on the ground either. So I guess we
No, we
come
don't
full
get to get
circle.
on the ground anymore in the temple.
Yeah.
But this is the thing, okay? We're going to make it fit. So your symbolic posture is lying on the ground, which you don't do in the temple. So this is really more form over substance, I think. And then finally, they're promised sealing blessings at the end there. You see that? They're promised sealing blessings, which of course is supposed to evoke in the temple-going Mormon's mind the idea about being sealed forever, marriage. And what we find, though, when we look it up, has nothing to do really with that, even though the word sealed is there. Where Mosiah says, or Benjamin says, therefore, I would that ye should be steadfast and immovable, always abounding in good works, that Christ the Lord God omnipotent may seal you his.
Yeah, this is not the sealing power. This is not a reference to the sealing
This is
power.
not the sealing power you're looking for.
No, it's just using language that I'm sure comes from the New Testament, talking about being sealed to Christ. This
Yes.
is a completely different concept than LDS temple sealing.
Yes. And yet, he's trying to sneak it in under the radar. Didn't get past us, though, did it, Kolby?
No.
Not a freaking chance. Then he goes on in the next page. He says, between 11 and 6 years before Joseph Smith became a Freemason, I'm never going to get tired of reading that line. The Lord told Joseph Smith that the Lord's people are to be endowed with power. So he saw it coming. He knew this, right? Of course, that was talking about the Kirtland Temple. I read Bushman's book, Rough Stone Rolling, where he concludes and documents that Joseph Smith continually was trying to get his people to experience this endowment of power.
Mm-hmm.
And it kept kind of largely failing. And so what I think he did was that then he finally created a temple endowment with the help of the Freemasons and their symbols, in which he could ritualize the appearance of God to all the people who went to the temple. And therefore, it wouldn't be up in the air and left to actually God showing up, right?
Mm-hmm.
God's busy. He's doing things. But if we can ritualize it, we can have a person standing in for God who shows up behind the veil and pulls someone through. Sorry, Kolby?
Well, I was going to say, I think you mentioning Kirtland is such a good point for people to consider too, that like everything else that Joseph Smith did, his theology on temples evolved over time. The Kirtland temple, you're right that there was this ritualistic element to it, right? But it doesn't reflect like the later Nauvoo period temple practices really at all. And so I'm just realizing here live how much that itself blows a hole in Austin's argument. If Joseph Smith had access through dictating the Book of Mormon and specifically King Benjamin's speech to all of these things that are supposedly ties to the temple endowment, why doesn't the Kirtland temple experience reflect the later endowment? That doesn't make any sense. Why would he go he goes out and then back in to these, this truth core? That doesn't make any sense.
This is why everybody loves to have you on the show, Kolby, including me. That's a great insight. Thank you so much for that. Yes, this part of his chapter blows apart the rest of his chapter.
Yep.
And then he finally goes, this is a quote here from Joseph Smith. I'm not reading everything. If you want to read it, go ahead. But then he has the question. Remember, the questions are marked by his little green arrows on the left, which he has complained previously about critics not responding to. Here's his question now, after all of these incredible evidences he has put forth. How do critics account for the various parts of the endowment being present in Joseph Smith's life and teachings long before the Nauvoo endowment ceremony?
Can I answer the question?
Please.
Because the various parts of the endowment ceremony that you've presented as being present in Joseph Smith's life and teachings are absolutely meaningless vagaries. You've expanded, you've zoomed out far enough to find the hits. And the point I just made about Kirtland demonstrates exactly what you've done. Because if your theory was true, the Kirtland temple experience should match the Nauvoo temple experience. Or maybe there'd be a natural progression, like it'd be refined over time, but they were completely different temple experiences. And it's right in the middle. So it blows a hole in your entire theory, Austin. There you go.
But he called it an endowment.
He sure used the word endowed with power.
I think that's what he's hanging his hat on.
Yeah.
Okay, so remember the endowment. Conclusion to this part, these early connections between, and I put that in quotation marks, by the way, these early connections between Joseph Smith and the temple endowment are contrived. Joseph Smith's knowledge of Masonry likely predated March of 1842. The real question is, why are apologists going to such lengths to make connections between the temple endowment and Joseph Smith before he became a Mason? And I think we've covered that, but you want to take a crack at answering that one, Kolby?
Well, it's because the causal link to Joseph Smith being exposed to Masonry is very problematic for the claim that he supposedly restored some truth that was present from the time of Adam. That's really where it is. It's a responsive argument to a criticism, but it's not really responding to the actual criticism.
Right, and the argument itself is terrible. You can see that this is something that's been thrust upon them, and they're desperately trying to find examples of Joseph Smith knowing about Freemasonry before he became a Mason. Now, He probably did, but I'm not seeing a whole lot of specifics anywhere.
Yeah, the way you said thrust upon them. I'll come back to what I said about our friend Don, but Austin as well. I'm sure the apologists would make better arguments if any existed.
One would think so.
Yeah.
I like to try and make my best arguments. I don't know about others. Okay.
Would you like me to read this paragraph?
Actually, before we get to that, I want to play a promo spot from a good friend of mine and probably of yours too, Kolby. Hang on a second. This is less than a minute long. Please give us your undivided attention to Bill Reel.
Hello, friends of Mormon Discussion Incorporated. I'm Bill Reel, founder and CEO, reaching out to our incredible community. Our mission is to support those examining the truth claims of Mormonism and those redefining their relationship with it. Our acclaimed lineup of podcasts, including Mormonism Live, Radio Free Mormon, Mormon Discussion, and others, offers a space for truth and healing.
But especially Radio Free Mormon.
Your donations power our work, expanding our outreach, improving our content, and creating new initiatives. Visit mormondiscussions.org, click the donate button, and make a difference today. Donate to your favorite show, like this one, as your support empowers us to empower others. Thank you for being a part of the change. Together, we're making real impact.
There we go. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for that unsolicited solicitation. All right, so that was the conclusion. Now we're going to go to the next one. You were very eager. By the way, while you're thinking about it, please hit like and please hit subscribe, those two buttons at the bottom of your screen. Please hit those right now if you would. That'd be great. Like and subscribe. Here we go. And if you're not already and you're watching this live, you might want to think about going to the live chat if you're not there, because that's where a lot of fun stuff happens in the live chat that's going on when the show is premiering, which it should this evening, Saturday, August 16th, 2025. We're recording this on the morning of. So continuing ancient temple connections, now he's going to show how the endowment matches the ancient world and show us that it really is true. It really is inspired. It didn't just come from Freemasonry, you know. So what do you want to read?
I will read the paragraph you have the highlighting in, unless you wanted me to read the quote. Okay.
No, so go ahead and read that paragraph that the highlighting's in and stop on the second word, would you?
Okay. So we're going to skip over a quote that he has from the History of the Church. And then he says, while some parallels exist between Freemasonry and the Latter-day Saint Temple.
That was the one. Some.
Yeah, some.
That's why it's underlined, highlighted. While some parallels, we're not going to tell you what they are or how many they are or how exact they are. This is the hand wave. This is all that you're going to get. All the information you're going to get. The stuff that troubled him, remember he said in his opening paragraph, this is all you're going to find out about him from Austin.
Yeah, I'm sure he was really troubled for those 2 weeks. The differences, the differences are the most informative. Unlike the Freemasonry rituals, the temple emphasizes creation, fall, redemption, and enthronement concepts. These same ideas are a near universal feature of temple rites in the ancient Near East. Well, you should already, when someone says near universal across an entire region, probably thinking, well, then maybe those ideas aren't that specific or meaningful. Concepts that Joseph Smith would not have known about in 1842, like Freemasonry, ancient Near East rituals included ritualistic hand clasps and sacred embraces.
Hmm. So, if Joseph Smith could have gotten these elements from Freemasonry next door or from the ancient Near East, what do you think's most likely if you got to choose one or the other?
You're asking me which is more likely, the thing that we know that he had joined and had access to about 20 years before he rolls out the temple endowment, or that he somehow was given access to sacred knowledge about the ancient Near East from millennia before?
Yeah, what do you think's most likely there? Is it kind of a toss up?
No, it's not even remotely close.
Well, he doesn't even think it's a toss up. He thinks it's definitely the Near East. It's the ancient Near East.
It's almost like he needs to make that argument.
It's kind of like that. Let's see how well he does. Oh, similarities. Okay, now we're getting to this portion. This is going to be a lot of fun, folks. If you want to watch, it is kind of overwhelming, the similarities between Mormonism and Masonry. And in fact, I have gone through in the last 45 years that I've been a member of the church or so, 47 now, 47 years that I've been a member of the church, that I have seen this go through a certain number of stages. And the first stage of the apologist was simply to deny that there were any connections or any parallels between Mormonism and Masonry, the Mormon temple and Masonry. Just deny. Then it shifted around to trying to say, yeah, there are a few, but it's not really important. There's so much more important stuff in the ancient Near East. And that's where Austin Fife is coming from at this point. He's acknowledging they exist. He's acknowledging they troubled him. And I think that's really interesting to acknowledge they troubled him and then to not talk about them at all, except to say there's some, but they're not really important.
Isn't that what happens on basically every challenging issue that confronts the church? Is slowly the apologists retreat to reality, are forced to make the factual concession and then argue that the factual concession still doesn't really amount to much. It just feels like that's the constant cycle that we see, whether it's with Joseph Smith's polygamy, the role of prophets when we look at it relative to the temple and priesthood ban on African-American members. It's the same game that happens every single time. The critics drag these apologists kicking and screaming, and then they still come up with some it's a lot like our discussion of Mott and Bailey, right? They're dragged kicking and screaming to make the concession, but they'll still go back out to that original argument if the person isn't clever and doesn't know fully. Usually that's what happens, at least.
You're right. So you ready for signs and penalties, old bean?
I'm ready.
Okay. So here's the first thing. Now, these are not pictures of the temple endowment. I'm not going to show those. I am going to show pictures of Masonry because, screw their sacred ceremonies. I'm going to respect the Mormon sacred ceremonies, but the Masons, sorry, guys.
If I don't hear from you next week, say hello to William Morgan for me.
I will. Thank you. I'll give him your best.
Yeah.
This is the sign of an entered apprentice, okay? And what it is it's this thing with the thumb and going across the throat here. It will be described below. That's a sign of an entered apprentice. By the way, this has not been performed in the Mormon temple since 1990 when it was removed in April of that year. All the penalties were removed from the LDS Temple Endowment in 1990. They had been there since the beginning, but ultimately they were seen as too troubling, I guess, to some members of the audience. They had a poll to find out what people liked and what they didn't like. People didn't like the penalties, so they removed them. And this is what it says. It says, the sign of the entered apprentice alludes to the penalty. The penalty. They use the same words, too, in many instances. Of the entered apprentice's obligation. The sign is made by drawing the right hand rapidly across the neck as shown on the left. The penalty that the sign alludes to is having my throat cut across, my tongue torn out by its roots, and my body buried in the rough sands of the sea at low water mark, where the tide ebbs and flows twice. in 24 hours should I ever knowingly violate this, my entered apprentice obligations, which is one of secrecy. So in the LDS temple, I think it's okay to talk about things that aren't there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That this is a history lesson, right? This was done saying that rather than divulge the tokens and signs that you had just learned, the first of the Aaronic priesthood, that rather than do so, you would suffer my life to be taken, were the words that were used. So the explanation of the entered apprentice sign is draw the right hand rapidly across the neck as represented and drop the arm to the side. And actually, this is what the voice tells you, or used to tell you in the endowment,
Right.
how to perform, and then drop the arm by your side. So this is one, and this is exact, okay? This is direct. This isn't chastity, the law of chastity. This isn't assuming a certain posture. This is an exact match between the Masonic ritual in their temple that Joseph Smith was made a full Mason in on March 16th, 1842. And then I think it was May 3rd, 1842. Then the not the free, but the endowment is first rolled out.
I don't know enough about Masonry, but is the sequence also the same? Because this would have been the first penalty, and is this also the first penalty in Masonry?
Well, I think so, because this is the apprentice.
Yeah,
Okay,
that would
they
make
have certain
sense to
levels.
me.
There's the apprentice, and then you become a master. And in the middle is, let me hang on a second, because it's going to be the next one. Yeah, the fellow craft. It's the second degree in the Blue Lodge. And I think these are sequential, and they do follow what used to be done in the LDS temple. So now this is the due guard of the fellow craft. By the way, can you look up what due guard is? I thought about looking that up, and then I forgot and got caught up with other things.
Oh, I got it right now.
Thank you, because I don't know the word DUEGARD, all one word, due guard of the fellow craft. I don't know.
It is actually the specific hand gesture that is referred to as the due guard. It's unique to Freemasonry.
This specific hand gesture.
This specific hand gesture, yes, of.
So you have your left hand raised to the square, and your right hand raised out in front of you. Sorry, you can't see me.
No, that's okay. It
In
says
this one, though, the right hand is turned down. You'll notice it's not in front of you in cupping shape. It's turned down because that's where the Bible would be that you'd be swearing on.
Right.
Even though it's the left hand being raised right hand as opposed to. So the due guard of the fellow craft represents the positions of the hands when taking the oath of the fellow craft degree. These are different degrees. My right hand, these are the words, my right hand on the Holy Bible, square and compasses. Okay, that's the thing I was talking about. Square and compasses. My left arm forming an angle supported by the square and my hand in a vertical position. All right.
The idea behind due guard is that you are duly guarding these secrets. That's where the word comes from.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Okay, so now this is the sign of the fellow craft and its penalty. Okay, once again, this is the fellow craft. There's apprentice, there's fellow craft, and there's master mason. Those are the 3 degrees. Just like if you were a real mason, right? Which is what it's kind of based off of. So the sign of a fellow craft, you got your right hand across and touching your left breast. Notice all these gentlemen have on their Masonic apron as well. The explanation of the fellow craft sign, the action of cupping one hand over the left breast and drawing it quickly across the body, signifies the heart being ripped out if the candidate should violate his fellow craft obligations. And it says in the top paragraph, the sign is made by cupping the right hand over the left breast, drawing it quickly across the body, then dropping the hand to the side, which is almost a verbatim quote from the endowment as it used to be in describing how I was supposed to do this as well as everybody else who was with me. And I did this for 12 years, from 1978 to 1990, every time I went to the temple for an endowment session before they changed it. That's another exact match, by the way. Sign of a master mason. Well, guess what we have here? The sign of the master mason alludes to the penalty of the master mason's obligation. Once again, these are all 3 penalties. To have my body cut in 2, my bowels removed and burned to ashes, which are then to be scattered to the 4 winds of heaven. The explanation of the Master Mason sign: the sign is made by drawing the thumb quickly across the waist to the right hip, then dropping the hand to the side. Another almost verbatim quote as how this was described prior to 1990. This action shows the stomach being ripped open. So this is part of the endowment. This is also another direct hit between Masonry and the endowment. The three penalties for the 3 degrees, the 3 main degrees of Masonry, matching the 3 penalties as they are in sequence in the endowment as it used to be.
Yeah, so not only do we have this conceptual match, right? Because earlier Austin was pointing to these very loose conceptual matches with the King Benjamin servant. We have that level plus the very specifics plus the sequence. So when you were asking me what are the odds between, Austin's comparisons being more meaningful or the comparison to Freemasonry being more meaningful, we'll evaluate that again when we get to the closing. I think I did some interesting analysis on this, but I want people to look at it while we're looking at this in detail. This is the difference. We're talking about very broad conceptual matches to not only do we have the conceptual match, we have the same terminology being used, penalties. We have sometimes almost word for word the exact same description of those penalties, and we have the sequence. This is like almost like genetic level similarity, right? When you get to this level of, if this were just random, this would be astronomical odds for this to just be random overlap.
Right. Very good. And it's not just the penalty, it's also the sign.
Right.
So you got
Right.
sign and penalty as well.
Right.
Now, I just want everybody to know, I'm not making this up. 1990 is now 35 years ago, it being 2025. Some people, most people who go to the temple today have never experienced making.
I never experienced.
Yeah. So I'm just putting this up there from Fair Mormon, who wouldn't lie about a thing like this, that the penalties were removed from the endowment in 1990. Okay. They say a former version of the endowment prior to 1990 used to contain mention of various penalties associated with the breaking of the temple covenants. Okay. So I'm not making this up. This is absolutely 100% true.
Did they have anything on here about the oath of vengeance? That was one of my favorite removes from the temple.
I think so. I think they probably do. It's fair. I mean, they got everything.
For folks who don't know, the oath of vengeance, early saints swore to take vengeance on, I think it was Missouri and the government of the United States because of the martyrdom of Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith.
I read a monograph by Van Hale in which he argued that it was technically what it was they received an obligation to continually pray to God to avenge.
That's
them.
correct.
Is that right?
Yes, you're right. The oath was actually to pray for the vengeance, not to enact the vengeance. There's a difference.
There's a difference in the language, but sometimes one leads to the other.
Yeah, I was going to say how meaningful that difference is will be in the eye of the beholder.
I know. Sometimes it's a short trip to the candy shop. Now, how about hand clasps and tokens? We've talked about signs and penalties. Hand clasps, which are called tokens, I believe, in the temple, the LDS temple. Not all Masonic elements were removed, as in the penalties, okay? So here's the grip of an entered apprentice. Once again, it's the apprentice. It's the lowest level, right? So the first level is to take your hands. This is a handshake. And if you can see the picture, it's so much better. But it's described as follows. The grip of the entered apprentice is made by pressing the thumb against the top of the first knuckle joint of the fellow Mason. The fellow Mason also presses his thumb against the first Mason's knuckle. Now, I'm not going to tell you how close that is to the first token in the LDS temple, but let's just say it's closer than chastity in King Benjamin's speech. Okay, it's a lot closer. So what the Masons end up doing with their hand clasps, they have a bunch of different hand clasps, but this series of hand clasps has to do with shaking hands and putting a thumb over the first knuckle. And when you shake your hands like that, the other person can put their thumb over your first knuckle as well.
Right.
And that's what they're talking about. On the other side, the reverse side where you can't see. And then they have a handshake where you move the thumb over into the depression between the first and second knuckles. That'll be the next one, by the way. Then you put it on top of the next knuckle, the second knuckle, and then in the depression between the second and third knuckles. Now, Mormonism ends up only using the first two of those. All right? But it is clear where it's coming from, I think. So that's the first one. And also the language is interesting. Here's the entire script, which you can stop and play, okay, or stop and read if you like. But I want to focus mainly on when it is that this is being given to the apprentice. This, what do they call it? A grip? They call it a grip or a handshake.
Mm-hmm.
It even has a name there. It's called Boaz, which is, of course, the name of one of the pillars of the temple. Solomon's temple, I believe. So here is the master in masonry. WM stands for worshipful master. That's the guy who's giving it. And SD stands for senior deacon, who's receiving it, I believe. So the worshipful master, at this time, the candidate, it is shown the grip of an entered apprentice, which is the grip we've been talking about. Worshipful master says, what is that? The senior deacon says, a grip. Worshipful master says, of what? The senior deacon says, of an entered apprentice. The worshipful master says, has it a name? The senior deacon says, it has. The worshipful master says, will you give it to me? The senior deacon says, I did not so receive it, neither will I so impart it. Then there's some language before and after that, but that's what I want to focus on because some of that language is going to strike people who've been to the endowment even yesterday, even earlier today, as extremely similar to the language and the colloquy that goes on for each of the tokens when they're received by people who go to the LDS temple. Does that sound familiar at all to you, Kolby? Obviously, there's some differences, and we know that Austin wants to focus on the differences, okay?
Right.
But here, this seems to be kind of specific.
Yeah, the level of specificity here is really, really stark to me. Yeah, it's almost word for word from what I remember, with obviously the names changed.
Yes. I have never, ever heard this kind of language anywhere else other than those two places, the Mormon temple and here in the Masonic ritual.
Yeah, which makes the differences not as meaningful as the similarities.
Yes, very good. Thank you. So here's the next one. So this is fellow craft. This is the second sign. It has a name. It's called shibboleth. The hand is taken as in an ordinary handshake. This is the one in the depression between the two knuckles, remember? And the mason presses the top of his thumb against the space between the first and second knuckle joints of the first two fingers of his fellow mason. Is this sounding familiar, Austin? The fellow mason also presses his thumb on the corresponding part of the first mason's hand. I don't think anybody could quibble that this is a direct hit, a most palpable hit between masonry and the LDS temple endowment. Once again, not talking about the temple endowment, just talking about masonry, folks. And here's Joaquin, or they say, I think it's Joaquin is the name of the other pillar in the temple. There being two. Real grip of a fellow craft. So this is the fellow craft, right? Now it's going to go on. And I wanted to include this for completeness' sake.
Yeah.
So you see now it's going from the first joint to the space in between, and now it's going to the second joint. That's where that thumb is. This is not replicated.
Yeah, basically the middle finger knuckle for people who can't see the photo.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
So the mason takes the fellow mason by the right hand as in an ordinary handshake and presses the top of his thumb hard on the second knuckle. And the other mason does the same thing in response. So this is to give you an idea of the series of progression that goes on in masonry, and that Mormonism uses the first two, but not this one. Then it goes to a different system. And this one now goes to the space between. This next handshake in masonry is called two-ball cane. Pass grip of a master mason, it now goes down to the next space, like I had indicated originally. And here's the Salt Lake Temple exterior. Wait a second. That's funny. These are drawings from an expose of masonry. It looks kind of similar, doesn't it? We've got a
Mhm.
handshake there on the exterior of the Salt Lake Temple. It's engraven in the exterior as part of the decoration, as part of the symbolism of what goes on inside.
I don't see the thumb on any knuckle for what it's worth.
I think they're not trying to give it away because it's on the outside. It is
Yeah.
simply a handshake. Nothing strange going on here. Now, this is interesting because this is like the supreme handshake, the ultimate handshake in Masonry. It's called Mahabone. It's called the real grip of a Master Mason. So this is Master Mason. And basically, you can see that this is a little bit different than the others. And when you're shaking hands, you interlock your little finger with the thumb of the other person. And then you take all three remaining fingers between the thumb and little finger, and you place them upon the wrist of the other person. Okay. Now, what seems to have happened is that the final and most impressive and important token in the LDS temple was made based on this, but make it so only the forefinger is touching the wrist of the other person.
It's interesting to me that this is the highest one in Masonry, and it's interesting to me that it also has two names. So in the text below the picture, it says this grip is also called the strong grip of the Master Mason or the lion's paw.
Mm-hmm.
Did any of the others have alternative names? I don't think so.
You know, I don't remember reading those, but you're right.
It's just interesting to me that the last one has
That's
this
weird.
alternative name in both of the ceremonies.
That is interesting because that's the same in Mormonism with the second token of the Melchizedek priesthood.
Correct.
Except instead of having the three, you have the okay. I'm basically trading on very sacred ground here, so I'll leave it at that. Okay. Let's just say that anybody who can't see the relationship between this and the second token of the Melchizedek priesthood doesn't want to see it. So it does say the Mason firmly grasps the right hand of a fellow Mason. The thumbs of both hands are interlaced. The first Mason presses the tops of his fingers against the wrists of the fellow Mason where it unites with the hand. So on the inside part of the wrist, the fellow Mason at the same time presses his fingers against the corresponding part of the first Mason's hand, and the fingers of each are somewhat apart. This grip is also called, there's the second name you're talking about, the strong grip of the Master Mason or the lion's paw. Instruction for this grip is given at the graveside, quote unquote, as part of the ritual in the Masonic temple, after the candidate has been raised, okay? Because the candidate is imitating Hiram Abiff, who is a character who's central. It is a dramatic presentation, just like the temple is, although with different characters. Okay. Now, so this is called Mahabone, is a name of this. And Mahabone is itself a symbolic name that is supposed to stand in. It's not the name itself, but it's supposed to be a substitute name that we are using in place of something more sacred, which ultimately I think ends up being the name of God.
Mm-hmm.
But Mahabone, not marrow in the bone, by the way.
Totally different. Totally
but
different.
Mahabone.
Yeah.
It's not Pele Ale either. It's Mahabone. How many times do I have to say this? Okay, so
before we transition, I was going to say, before we transition to 5 points of fellowship, I just wanted to tell a quick little story. My dad, one time, he was just for work, he was delivering something to somebody's home, and the guy he was delivering to was a Mason and knew that my dad was Mormon. And my dad's told me the story before of the guy greeting him with some of these handshakes and was trying to have a conversation about it. And that it just really like spooked my dad and freaked him out. He knew nothing of the similarities between these things. And so he was really, really surprised based on that interaction he had with this guy, 20 years ago or whatever it was.
That's great. Hey, can you tell the audience what you told me? I think it was yesterday. Might have been this morning. I think it was yesterday about your dad, the first time you were going to the temple. Are you okay sharing that story?
Yeah. So the first time my dad and I were driving to the temple, for my endowment or for my initiatory and endowment, my dad said, "Son, today you're going to understand why people say that we're in a cult." And that was the prep I had going into the temple.
Wow. Thanks, Dad. What did you think when he said that?
I mean, it was better than what I said to my brother. I said to my brother facetiously, but he didn't know that. I just said, be sure and keep an eye on the goat.
Yeah.
And that.
Don't let the goat get away, because
don't
then
let
it
the
causes
goat get
all kinds
away.
of havoc.
Yeah, exactly.
It was chasing
What
it with
was the
a knife.
question you asked me? What did I think about that
Yeah,
after?
what did you think when your dad tells you, okay, son, you're going to the temple for the first time today, and you're finally going to find out why people say we're in a cult?
I mean, I can definitely understand that at times in my life I would have written something very similar to what Austin did about the temple, that I thought it was a place of peace. I think now in retrospect, as I look back on experiences I had in the temple, I think I brought that peace with me. And what I mean by that is just having a space that was like a place that I could go and be away from the things of the world. I wasn't accessible by phone, that I was focused on things that were important to me at the time. I think I brought the magic with me. I think as I look back on my time in Mormonism, I always brought the magic with me.
Well, that makes me think about Austin talking about being in a little copse of trees on the temple grounds and finding peace there.
Mhm.
And I wonder, well, would you have found peace in a copse of woods that was just on the other side of the property line?
Exactly.
And if you would have, then would you have found it in any copse of woods, or would you have found it as Thoreau found it at
Mhm.
Walden's Pond?
Mhm.
Maybe. I don't know. I think you're right about that.
Yeah.
So let's go back to this. And now we're done with all these, the tokens and the handshakes, because first off, what we did was the penalties and the signs. Then we went to the tokens and the handshakes. We're finding a lot of specificity here, but we're not done, folks. Not yet. Because we got the 5 points of fellowship. Once again, another thing that was taken out in 1990, but the 5 points of fellowship is something that was done in the temple. There's still sort of a quote unquote embrace, but it's a very, very watered down version of the 5 points of fellowship,
Right.
which is a picture of right here. The 5 points of fellowship, and the 5 points, it'll describe it, have to do with the inside of right foot to the inside of right foot. That's one. The knee to the knee, right hand to hand. And on the right hand or right hand, you're holding each other. And by the way, we can't see what that grip is, but I'm sure there's a grip there involved.
Mhm.
And then hand to back, and then mouth to ear. Okay, those are the 5 points of fellowship in Masonry. And they're called the 5 points of fellowship. And what I want to say is this, is that in Mormonism, in the temple before 1990, it wasn't just that we did this or something similar to this. We did exactly this. It was described exactly the same way. And folks, it was called the 5 points of fellowship. You will receive it upon the 5 points of fellowship through the veil. And then they describe it exactly the way it's described here, which says the 5 points of fellowship. By the way, could you read this, Kolby?
Sure.
The second paragraph.
Yep. The 5 points of fellowship is demonstrated as the worshipful master and the candidate embrace one another thusly: foot to foot, knee to knee, breast to breast, hand to back, and cheek to cheek or mouth to ear. While in this position and at low breath, the worshipful master then whispers Maha Bone in the ear of the candidate. Maha Bone is the substitute for the master's word. It means what? The builder. The proper means for an exchange of the substitute of the master's word is alluded to in the obligation of the master mason. Furthermore, I do promise and swear that I will not give the substitute for the master's word in any other way or manner than in which I receive it, which will be on the 5 points of fellowship and at low breath.
Yes, and we understand in the temple endowment, without saying what it is, because this is the most sacred part of the temple endowment, okay, is when you receive the name of the second token of the Melchizedek priesthood, you can only receive that from the Lord through the veil. You cannot receive it just from a temple worker like all the rest. This is set apart very much in the same way that it's set apart in Masonry, with this particular grip, and not just the grip, but on the 5 points of fellowship, this closeness, because it's secret, because it's private. And in the LDS temple, you don't mention this anywhere else. It's not said anywhere else except upon the 5 points of fellowship through the veil. You're given it whispered in your ear, and you give it back whispered to the individual on the other side. of the veil, or at least you used to. You still do, just not on the 5 points of fellowship. They have like 2 points now, right? Sort of like hand to back and mouth to ear is really all that they have.
Yeah, and from my experience, I sure wish that low breath had maybe had some gum first, you know?
Oh man, it's a really good thing there's a veil there, really.
Yeah.
That may be the whole reason for the veil. So this super secrecy about the second token of the Melchizedek priesthood in the LDS temple, or the name, is replicated, or obviously I think derived from, the Masonic Master Mason degree and the real grip of a Master Mason, and the Maha Bone, which is received only in a whisper tone and only in this one place. So I will not give the substitute for the Master's word, Maha Bone, in any other way or manner than that in which I received it. So that's the only time you mention it, just like in the LDS temple.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a pretty strong comparison. What do you think?
Well, it's much stronger than any of the comparisons Austin painted, and that's the point, is to deny the link between Freemasonry and the LDS Temple endowment really can't be believed. The apologists have to pivot to a new argument, which is just making it not an issue or coming up with some alternative explanation to pretend, like Austin does, that these parallels aren't very problematic for the claims of the LDS Temple endowment. I just don't think you can make this argument. These parallels are so much more close and specific. We have very specific matching of even the the order in which they're given, the sequence. That's the word I'm thinking of. The sequence in which they're given, that is just, in my view, impossible to ignore.
I think so too. And the more I get into this, and I got to tell you, as I was putting all these together, having had some familiarity with this stuff before, but putting them all together like I did in preparation for the show, I myself was kind of overwhelmed by the number of specific parallels between Masonry and the Temple endowment. We're going to continue from here, but as I got more and more into the specifics and began to see more and more how clear-cut the case is and how much stronger the case is for Masonry being the source for the Temple endowment rather than the ancient Near East, I began to say, Austin, you're not really playing straight here by just sort of waving at them and saying, yeah, there are some, but the connections with the old world are much better, and never talking about what the some are, because there's not just some, there's a lot, and they're very specific and much better than the connections to the ancient world, as you pointed out.
Exactly.
Oh, the distress signal, the Masonic distress signal. Here we go. This happens in the temple as well. Here's the grand hailing sign of distress of the Mason. You'll see his hands, both hands raised up, kind of with the palms out, arms sort of at a square. But there's more. After receiving instruction in the proper communication of the substitute for the Master's word, the candidate is then instructed in regards to the grand hailing sign of distress. It is given by raising both hands toward heaven, with each arm forming the angle of a square or a 90-degree angle. The arms are then lowered in 3 distinct motions to the sides. In other words, ending with both arms in the natural downward position, such as when one is standing. And it says at, and then there's a blank. I don't know if that means at attention or at rest, but when one is standing. Now, this happens exactly in the temple endowment, and it happens as the sign of the second token of the Melchizedek priesthood. And, David Bednar said that the things you can't talk about are really just the signs and the tokens and everything. But those are given. And before 1990, we had 3 Adamic words, which the people in the temple, and I did this as well, we said, chanted, it sounds like chanting, as we were doing this sign. And it was pay, lay, ale. Pay, lay, ale. Pay, lay, ale. In other words, they're doing it exactly the same as it's being described here. Instead of Mahabon, it's Pele Ale, which we understand means in Adamic, "Oh God, hear the words of my mouth." Okay. So this is very, very similar. It also says the candidate is additionally instructed, however, that if he is in a place where the sign could not be seen, he is to utter a substitute for the sign, which is this: O Lord my God, is there no help for the widow's son? It is widely believed that this is what Joseph Smith was saying before he got cut off by a bullet in Carthage jail to the mob, to call upon any Masons in the mob to come to his assistance.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't look like it worked. Maybe they only have to come if he gets out the entire sentence, and they shot him before he did. So it was okay. He is additionally advised that the sign and these words are never to be given together. That's an interesting thing. You don't use the sign and the words, just the sign or the words. Remember that, Kolby, okay? But we can see this. We can see this very clearly in the temple itself, the use of this sign.
Well, and in the temple itself, going back to the question you asked me, what did I think of my dad's preface to my temple experience the first time through? When we got to this portion, and again, we're talking about the Masonic element, but this is incorporated into the temple experience. This was the part that I was like, yep, he made good on that promise. That's for sure. Because it is not something that one is used to.
No. Pele ale, Pele ale, Pele ale. It's okay to talk about. This is history. This isn't going on in there now.
Mm-hmm.
Now they just use the interpretation and do everything else the same as they used to. Oh, clothing, ritual temple clothing. There's more. You mean the temple clothing is similar too? Here's a picture. You don't get a lot of pictures of Masons in their garb, and that's because it's supposed to be kept secret. But here's an old picture of Royal Arch Masons in Illinois. Here's hats, robes, and aprons. Oh my. You can see, if you look at this guy at the bottom left or the bottom right, who may be his twin, they're dressed similarly. You can see the hats that they have on. It sort of looks like a short, kind of small baker's hat that they have on.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm also noticing the arch.
Yes. What are you noticing about the arch?
The arch reads "Holiness to the Lord."
Does it? Oh, you dog. Does it really? I can't even see that. How can you see that? What kind of screen do you have?
Well,
better than mine, apparently.
Yeah.
Maybe your eyes are better.
And
the arch says "Holiness to the Lord." Okay, what does every temple have written on the outside?
Yeah, holiness to the Lord.
As we've been told over and over again, holiness to the Lord. There's another connection. Wow. And also, by the way, if you don't know, look at the windows. The windows are blacked out. They're blocked, okay? Because nobody from the outside is supposed to be able to see inside, because what's going on inside is secret. Sort of, that's like the LDS temple as well, of course. They're designed so that nobody can see in. So there you've got these people. You got the hats, the baker's hat, very similar to what men wear in the temple. Of course, Masonry was originally, and I think largely still is, a male-only kind of thing. I know there's a women's organization that they have, and that Joseph Smith was created a women's organization to the church, but that's why these are only men, and they have the baker's hat, they have the robes, and then they have the apron that they're wearing. And some guys have different robes. They're probably of different orders and different degrees, but you can see them there, and they're posing for the camera.
Mm-hmm.
And does that look at all similar? Do you get the same kind of vibe from these guys as you did your first day at the temple?
Yeah, it looks very similar. I also I remember one time leaning over when I was during a temple session during my mission. I remember leaning over to my companion at the time, who often got uncomfortable giggles, leaning over and whispering to him, "Nice hat." And it cracked him up a little bit. Yeah.
Very good. So did you like the blonde Eve or the brunette Eve?
When I was on my mission, I would have done with either of the Eves, You're
kind of desperate on your mission, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, here's George Washington. He has on his regalia there in a different picture. Here's his apron with the square and compass, topped by the all-seeing eye. Now, that thing that looks like a giant W there on his apron or whatever it is, that is actually, you can see the square, right? The square's on the bottom.
Yep.
And then the compass from the top, and they form that design. And above that, still on the apron though, that's the all-seeing eye, making sure that everything is going according to Hoyle.
Mm-hmm.
Some Masonic robes were tied with a sash around the waist, believe it or not. If that sounds similar to the temple, that's your problem, not mine. So there's the clothing. And now we're going to go to the symbols in temple architecture. My gosh, this list of comparisons, some of them striking, many of them striking, just goes on and on. You've got the beehive. So the beehive is a prominent symbol in Masonry over on the right. That is where it is produced in a Masonic printing. But of course, we all know about the beehive in Mormonism, and it's even on the doorknob of the Salt Lake Temple where it says holiness to the Lord around it as well. That's on the left. Here's the all-seeing eye on the Salt Lake Temple exterior. That's reproduced there as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, any Mason going to the Salt Lake Temple and just walking around the grounds would immediately say, this is derived from Masonry. And here's some Masonic depictions. You can see the square and compass over here on the bottom left with the all-seeing eye. And then here in the middle, once again, this is sort of like a medallion type of image. All-seeing eye, these are Masonic. And up here on the right, you see the all-seeing eye in the middle of a triangle surrounded by three emblems of star, moon, and sun,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which end up being very important elements in Mormonism. And I'm not just talking about the 3 degrees of glory. I'm talking about the Salt Lake Temple. Excuse me, this is the Nauvoo Temple.
Mm-hmm.
The Nauvoo Temple, we all know that the Nauvoo Temple has sunstones in it. It has a very famous magazine and symposium named after them. Sunstones, but it also has star stones and moonstones. And here we have some pictures of the different elements. Excuse me. So we have stars on the stones and stars in the circular windows as well
Mm-hmm.
of the Nauvoo Temple. Notice the stars over here on the right. Here's sort of a drawing, more architectural in nature of a sketch. Star stones are at the top. See the stars there?
Mm-hmm.
Beneath them at the top of the columns are the sunstones. And then at the bottom of the column are the moonstones. Those don't get as much play because they're like crescents that are turned on their sides. But those are the moonstones right there. So you have moons on the bottom, sunstones next going up, and then stars at the top.
Usually a 5-pointed star upside down like that is like a pentagram. Do you know when did the satanic meaning get associated with an upside down star?
I think it's relatively recent, and by that I mean hundreds of years.
Yeah.
But I believe that this is a sign not necessarily of Satan, but of Baphomet,
Mm-hmm.
who is a deity individual that has a goat's head, but is not necessarily satanic. But then the crossover gets it's a messy subject, and one I'm not really capable of expatiating on.
I only noticed that there's a difference, that the Masonic star was the normal side up with the point at the top, in other words, and the one on the Nauvoo Temple at least has the point down.
Oh, right. Well, yeah, and the satanic associations come later. This is not supposed to be satanic, although you'll find evangelicals going, see.
Yeah. No, those arguments are as irritating to me as Austin's bad arguments. So that's not what I was implying.
And also notice on the star stones themselves, they're inverted, but that bottom ray is a little bit elongated.
Yeah, the stones actually are a 6-point star, not a 5-point star. It looks like, to me, at least.
No, those are 5. The stones?
The stone above the...
Oh, above. Okay, so there are 5-pointed stars above.
No, well, there's 5 points in the window, and then there's 6 on the stone above the window for whatever reason.
They look like 5 to me from here. But then again, you've already proven that your eyesight's better than mine. No, here it is. 1, 2, 3. Yes, I'm sorry. And the one that has color in it, that where it shows center, the center picture,
Yep.
Now I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Oh,
6.
I
That's very
do see
clear
the
there.
5-pointed stone you're looking at, which is between the two windows. Yes, that one is 5, and then the ones above, basically on the underside of that little, I don't know what you'd call it, that little ledge, those are 6 points, it looks like.
Yeah, that's interesting because they do have both 5 and 6 pointed stars.
Odd.
By the way, this is a very famous representation of the Masonic emblem,
Mhm.
which you'll see not only has the square and the compass, but also it is an inverted 5-pointed star.
Mhm.
Now, if you'll look at the Salt Lake Temple, you've got 4 stars there. If you can see them there, I'm pointing at them with my cursor, which you can't see, but they go marching across the center there. It's toward the top. And on the left and the right of those stars, you will see clouds with rays of light coming out of them. Can you see those?
Yes. Mhm.
Here's another interesting diagram I found with the different exterior symbols carved into the Salt Lake Temple. Of course, you got Moroni at the top. But here, upper left, you have those clouds with the rays coming out of them. Then you also have a Big Dipper, and you can see the location of these symbols on the temple. There are arrows or lines drawn.
Mhm.
Then below the Big Dipper is the all-seeing eye. You can see where that appears on the temple. Then there is the clasping hands and where that is on the temple. Then the doorknob with the
beehive.
The beehive. I'm looking at the thing on the left of it, though. I see the doorknob. I'm not sure what the thing on the left of it is, but I think it's another beehive.
Mhm.
And then on the right, we have the different stones, right, that we've talked about. We have the star stones, we have the sunstones, and we have the moonstones. And if you'll notice, they're in the same order on the Salt Lake Temple that they were on the Nauvoo Temple.
Mhm.
Star on the top, then sun, then moon, and those are crescents as well. And then here at the bottom, we have an interesting stone, which I really did not know what that was. Have you ever seen that one before? The one on the bottom right?
I think I've seen these before, and I always just assumed it was like a waxing and waning moon, like they were showing the full progression. But no, tell me about this.
This is simply a square and circle. You see square and you see the circle, which is a different way of representing the square and the compass, because the square makes the square, duh, and the compass makes the circle.
Oh, interesting.
I didn't know that till I looked it up. So Freemasonry also has a corollary to the clouds with the rays of light coming out. In Freemasonry, the concept of light emerging from clouds is a powerful symbol representing spiritual enlightenment and the overcoming of ignorance or darkness. Makes sense? The cloud can represent the limitations of human understanding or the veil of worldly concerns, while the light signifies knowledge, truth, and divine guidance.
Mm-hmm.
This imagery is often associated with the eye of providence, which is frequently depicted surrounded by clouds and rays of light. The eye of providence, the all-seeing eye. So there's another connection between Mormon temples and Masonry. The Big Dipper on the Salt Lake Temple. Now, I got a couple pictures so you can see it. So there's the Big Dipper. This is the same image. There's only one, I believe, on the temple. It's the same Big Dipper. It's different images, obviously, but hopefully so you can get a better look at it.
I wonder if they'll smooth that out in the renovations.
I wonder what they did to put that in there, but I don't know exactly, but you can definitely still see it. It's up in the sky. It's above the sunstones, I believe, and it's pointing up toward the stars, which would make sense. Now, the Big Dipper represents the North Star.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about this and thinking, okay, you got the North Star. If you put a star up there, what's that going to show? Nothing. You got a star. It looks like every other freaking star. The way you symbolize the North Star is by drawing the Big Dipper because, of course, the 2 pointer stars point to the North Star. And if you don't know what the pointer stars is, get a Boy Scout manual. Tenderfoot, you're supposed to learn that kind of stuff. No, if you look at it, it's not the handle. It's the far 2 corners on the outside of the dipper, and they're pointing up toward the North Star. So in Freemasonry, you mean the North Star gets used in Freemasonry? Well, it's pretty popular. In Freemasonry, the North Star, also known as the Pole Star or Polaris, is a powerful symbol representing guidance, direction, and hope. It is a symbol of the fixed point in the heavens, guiding Freemasons through the stormy seas of time. The North Star is also associated with the seven stars, possibly referencing the constellation Ursa Minor, and the concept of right and justice within the order. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You see there's 7 stars in the Big Dipper there. That's what it's referencing. And this is the interior of a very nice Masonic hall. And you can see up there in the ceiling, very much surrounded by all sorts of emblems of glory, is a star, which is the North Star, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And in case you're wondering if they have the Big Dipper, yeah, they got that too. Here's a little enamel masonry pin. I think it's from 1981. And you'll see it has all the Masonic emblems all around it. And then in the middle of it is the Big Dipper.
Big Dipper. Yep.
And here's the circle and square stone. Could you read this, Kolby?
Yes. In Freemasonry, the circle and square, often seen together as the square and compasses, are significant symbols representing moral and ethical principles. The square, a tool for ensuring right angles in construction, symbolizes morality and righteous conduct in Freemasonry. The compasses, used to draw circles, represent the boundaries of our actions and relationships, reminding Masons to circumscribe their passions and maintain good conduct. Well, that sounds familiar.
Does it? How so?
Well, it's very similar to the wording of the temple endowment when these symbols are introduced at the veil.
Your passions should be kept within the bounds the Lord has set.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry if I said too much, but
no,
I want to make it
that's
really
not
clear.
Something people promise not to reveal. So if it's fair game for apostles and prophets to talk about, I think it's completely fair game for us to talk about.
Yes. So that's the deal. There are so many similarities here that are spot on. And did you get to the end of it? The compasses used to draw circles represent the boundaries of our actions, right? The boundaries the Lord has set, reminding Masons to circumscribe their passions and maintain good conduct. And that word circumscribe ends up being used in the temple as well. Circumscribed, all truth may be circumscribed into one great whole. Now, I'm putting up here some of the things that we've gone over in order to represent everything that we've gone over with the connections between the temples of Masonry and Mormonism. And then I've superimposed this quote that we've been discussing from Austin Fife, where he says, while some parallels exist between Freemasonry and the Latter-day Saint Temple endowment, the differences are the most informative. Yeah, I don't want to talk about those similarities. Let's talk about the differences.
He should just be honest and say the differences are the ones I need to talk about to make my point, because they're not the most informative. That's ridiculous.
I know. But we had to do the work that Austin Fife did not do in order to make the case as clearly as possible. In fact, one might suspect that Austin did not bring this up and did not mention it because he wanted to hide it from you to make you think the case was not as strong as it actually is.
Right.
How the apologist game is played. Well, we're going to find out. We're going to find out from none other than Austin Fife as he continues with this chapter, where now that he has not compared the temple of the Mormons with the temple of the Masons, he's going to compare it with everything else in the world in ancient history from wherever it might be and from whatever time period, including China. You want to read this one?
Sure. In ancient Chinese traditions, except for these names that I'm not going to be able to pronounce, I'm going to guess it's Fuxi and Nuwa are revered as the first humans created. On the right, Fuxi is usually depicted holding a square, while on the left, Nuwa holds a compass. Their story also shows temple patterns. Fuxi is often portrayed as a man wearing animal skins.
That's a temple pattern.
Yeah. He offered the first open-air sacrifice to heaven on a mountain and introduced the institution of marriage. As with the other ancient traditions, it is implausible that these ideas would have been known to Joseph Smith in 1842.
Well, they were unknown to me until 2025. So what the hell difference does it make, Austin? That's the question I have.
I always think it's funny when they think a hit like this story incorporates the two first humans created. Like every every mythology that's ever started has some explanation from where humans came from, because we are insanely narcissistic as a species, right? We literally have to explain where we came from. And every mythology throughout history has attempted to do that in different ways. This is again where the more you zoom out and the vaguer you make your parallels, you can find parallels anywhere. Like, it's so unimpressive to me to say, oh, their story also deals with the first humans created. Well, guess what? So does every mythological story ever deals with the first humans that were created.
Here is the way the apologist game is played on this, okay? Is that because the temple endowment represents itself as going back to Adam, therefore, the subsequent belief arises and is largely held among Mormons that the endowment itself really does go back to Adam.
Right.
As we have it today, not before 1990. Well, maybe before. Who knows which one? But the Mormon temple endowment, one of the versions, was given to Adam. And therefore, since everything kind of went kablooey after that, and there was apostasies and people spread out and they have their own ideas, but even though they apostatize, there are going to be remnants and relics and echoes of the original temple endowment that they had and knew in whatever crazy apostate temple stuff or ritual stuff they're doing later. Therefore, any connection, any echo or illusion we can find between the Mormon temple endowment and any other culture on the face of the earth, no matter how far flung, no matter how remote, no matter what time period, Mormon apologists will look to and say, aha, that proves that the Mormon temple endowment is true and ancient. And this is an example of that.
Exactly. And they don't pause to think about this. Like, Fushi is often portrayed as a man wearing animal skins. Think about calling that a hit. Like, recently we went down to Salt Lake and took the kids to the Natural History Museum there at University of Utah. They had an entire exhibit on Ice Age and on Neanderthals. The Neanderthal man and woman were depicted wearing animal skins because guess what? That's what our historical ancestors did. And yet he thinks this is a meaningful parallel. It's like they don't stop and think about what the alternative would be. It's almost like when we're considering these parallels, we need to be considering almost like at a Bayesian level, like what is more likely, that this is just part of the human story, that there were two first humans and that they wore animal skins. Same thing with the compass and the square. The compass and the square have functional uses. So it should be completely unsurprising that a society like China that had written systems, that had arithmetic, that had math, that built buildings, used a compass and a square in some symbolic fashion. These things are universal for a reason. It's like I've heard before people point to the Shinto practices of washing and try and find analogs to the temple endowment there too. And it's like, you use water to purify something? However could they have come up with that idea? Oh, only the entire course of human history deals with water being used as a purification or in purification rituals. These parallels are so meaningless when you really stop and pause and think about them for a second. The only reason that Austin includes them is because he needs to make this argument. And so he will reach to find evidence wherever it comes from, exactly like you just said.
Yes, and not only does Austin Fife or whoever wrote this play this game, but I used to play it on my mission, or at least other missionaries did. Now, you may recall I went to Japan on my mission. The important thing is that now apologists can look at all cultures around the world from whatever time period, including Japan, right? Find similarities to the endowment and claim victory. I got to tell you what I heard as a missionary and what I believed as a missionary. This is a Shinto temple.
Mm-hmm.
In front of Shinto temples, there's a couple of guard dogs on either side. What?
Komainu.
Oh, Gesundheit. So one of them has an open mouth and one of them has a closed mouth. And sometimes the one with the open mouth will have the ball in it. But regardless, open and closed, thus representing the sounds ah and which are represented then by the missionaries as being the first and last sounds, letters, quote unquote, of the Japanese alphabet, corresponding to alpha and omega in the Greek, and thereby the Komainu represent Jesus Christ, the
Is
author and
the
finisher of our faith.
is the open mouth one the key master? Which one's the key master?
I'm not even sure,
Okay.
because I thought that was Rick Moranis.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. But yeah, so this is how the game is played and how Mormon missionaries do it. In order to support the church, they will look about to find the craziest connections between whatever culture they're in Mormonism, and especially if it's related to a temple. Oh, wow. Now you're in pay dirt. It's the exact same kind of thing that Austin Fife is doing, just pointing it out and having a little laugh at my expense for my missionary days. Now he's going to talk about ancient Egyptian temple rites. And we're not going to go a lot into it. I mean, he comes up with a couple of pictures. We have one up there where he talks about a ritualistic embrace. Oh my gosh, look, the Egyptians did this ritualistic embrace too.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, the temple is true. The Mormon temple is true. He says, moreover, ritualistic hand clasps, oh my gosh, they did that too, and sacred embraces are found throughout ancient Egyptian iconography. So therefore, you can see that the Mormon temple really is ancient. Now, these embraces may have nothing to do with what happens in the Mormon temple. In fact, the Mormon temple, it's the 5 points of fellowship, which is an ironic point of this, is that I don't know if Austin Fife even knows why the research he's citing talks about ritualistic embraces, because they don't have them in the temple anymore.
Right.
They used to before 1990, which is what this was written to address, but I doubt that Austin Fife went to the temple before 1990, and I got my doubts as to whether he knows about the 5 points of fellowship. He should know.
And
but I don't know that he does.
think about the effect of his argument here. This isn't the same sacred embrace or ritualistic embrace. It isn't the same ritualistic hand clasp. So here we're talking general concept match with ancient Egyptian rites, which one, I'm not even sure what that's supposed to mean, really, because he never actually makes the argument on what it means, right? He just points to these things with the premise that if they're ancient, they must therefore be what? Linked
Well,
back.
in this case, of course, Joseph Smith got the endowment from translating the Book of Mormon, which was written, the Book of Abraham, which was written upon Egyptian papyrus, and therefore,
yeah, you just have to look closely, and you can
that's
see
the
how
connection.
that whole thing happened. Yeah, but my point with this is, think this through for a second, folks. He's rejected the parallels between Freemasonry and the LDS Temple Endowment, which is literally the same some of the same hand class in the same sequence, and it's literally the exact same sacred embrace
With the same name.
with the same name, described the same way. He's going to reject those parallels for these general conceptual matches. Back to your point, this is exactly how the apologetic game is played. I'm going to ignore the obvious to reach and find these much more difficult to see parallels. It's just it's so obvious in this chapter. When you and I were talking on the phone yesterday in preparation for today's recording, one of the things I said and pointed out is it would be one thing if Austin was making both of these arguments in his same book. These, like RFM and I are showing you in the sequence they happen in the chapter. Like these come back to back with him rejecting the Freemasonry parallels and then going all over the world to find these other parallels. It's really, really bad just structure of the argument, because it'd be one thing, like I said, if this inconsistency in his methodology was in the same book, but it's literally on the same page.
Yes. I think that most people who are reasonable and who are watching the show would agree that the connections between the Mormon temple and Masonry are much stronger and more prolific and specific than these ancient world connections he's putting forward.
Right.
And yet, after having signaled that he knows about these connections between Freemasonry and the temple, because he says he was troubled by them, he has chosen to go with the much less specific, much less impressive connections between the old world and the temple. And after you see the two categories of connections and how much more impressive Masonry is over the ancient world, we're left with a conclusion, I think, that Austin is going with the connections with the old world, not because they're actually better or more significant, because no reasonable person could conclude that.
Right.
It's because of a religious bias that he signaled even at the outset of the chapter when he said how much he loves the temple. Okay. So once again, this is how the apologetic game is played, and he's actually going to say it. You want to go ahead and read this? In other words, you can find connections anywhere in the world in any circumstance, and it's going to be an evidence of the temple.
Right. Once I considered rituals and symbols across time in different cultures, I saw shadows of the temple endowment in modern day ceremonies. Excuse me. High school and college graduates wear special robes and transfer their graduation tassels from left to right.
See?
I like the bolding.
There you go. They wear special robes and they transfer their graduation tassels from left to right.
This is such a weird. I guess I missed this passage, or maybe it's just hitting me differently this morning. Witnesses in court lay their hand on a Bible and raise their arm to the square. A royal coronation is done in a particular place where the individual is consecrated with oil. An oath is administered at an altar. The oath includes questions and affirmative responses. The ceremony includes special clothing, caps or crowns are worn, and various tokens are brought forth to be held in specific hands. And what I mean by this is hitting me differently this morning is, well, one, we always read these chapters before we review them because we're not hacks. Two, what I mean is this is hitting me different because if you can find these parallels all over the world, Austin, that should be a very clear signal to you that the parallels you're seeing are not meaningful. Right? Am I crazy? That's like he's making our point for us. As soon as I was able to look, I saw the temple everywhere. If you're seeing the temple everywhere, then you're probably just seeing it everywhere because your brain is a meaning-making machine, and that's what it does.
Well, when you start, you don't see a lot of red Volkswagens, Beetles on the highway until you start thinking about them, and then you see them everywhere. By the way, I know what he's talking about, the tassel from left to right, because I had made that connection decades ago.
Yeah.
He's referring to a former instantiation, a former form of the endowment where when you put the robe on, you're instructed to put it on with the, what is it that's on the left shoulder?
There's like a little, I don't know, some little decorative something that then a tassel or something. I can't remember what they refer to it as, but I know what you're talking about.
The shoulder, and then you take them off and you put it on again, but you put it on the reversed way so that it's over the right shoulder. So it goes from left to right is what he's talking. I think they've taken that away. So that you don't change the shoulders anymore, but it was on a former version of the endowment. He doesn't make that connection. Maybe feels like it would be improper to. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe his AI didn't explain it to him. But when you get to this bottom part where he says, and various tokens are brought forth to be held in specific hands. I don't even know what he's talking about there.
Well, he's got a picture of the Queen of England there with her scepter in her hand. And that's where you have to be very careful about the way they equivocate over the use of words. Tokens are brought forth to be held in specific hands. Is he talking about the scepter? Presumably, because that's the photo he's got on the same page. And we're talking about something. Yeah, we're talking about something completely different. But if you zoom out enough, you can make them sound similar.
And she has a baker's hat on as well. Oh, wait, there's a few jewels in that baker's hat.
You know, by that logic, the ritual for the folks in the audience who are fans of Seinfeld, you're going to remember a famous episode of Seinfeld where there's a character known affectionately as the soup Nazi. And there is a very specific order in which you are supposed to order your food from the soup Nazi. You are supposed to hold your money in a specific hand and hand it over exactly when you say a specific thing. That would be a match in Austin's methodology to the temple endowment because you're holding specific things in specific hands and delivering them at a certain time to a specific person.
I thought it was because you were paying to rent your temple clothes.
Yeah. No soup for you.
No soup for you. But here's the question. I've got many questions about this. Here's the question. At what place in the temple does anybody wear or hold something in a specific hand?
Well, none that I know of.
Never.
Yeah.
Never. There's nothing held in hand unless you're talking about shaking hands where you're holding someone else's hand.
I think that's what he is talking about. Again, he's just equivocating. He's using tokens in like a more conventional sense than is used in the temple, and then equivocating from there.
I think that must be what's going on. But he continues to play the game, and he says, the reality is that the endowment has as many, if not more, connections to ancient temple traditions and coronation ceremonies as it does to Freemasonry. I'm not sure how we got coronation ceremonies wedged in there.
And we're going to run the numbers. We're going to run the numbers on that, folks. Let's see if he actually is right.
Go ahead and throw it in there. I don't care. No, I think that you're wrong. I think we've demonstrated that you're wrong, that your reality is skewed. Austin, what do you think? Do you agree with Austin that this is the reality?
Oh, we're going to get there because I run the numbers here in a few slides.
And then he says, the more I understood about the temple, the more I asked myself, what ancient source connects all of these ritualistic and mythological traditions?
I want to back up for a second because you skipped over his inane question. He says, why do critics emphasize the Freemasonry connections and completely ignore the more substantial ancient connections? Remember that, folks.
I think that's a misleading question, Your Honor. Objection. It's not only a leading question, it's a misleading question because it argues facts not in evidence. Of course, he kept them out of evidence. We're the ones who put him in evidence. That's why God created defense lawyers, so you get the other side of the story. Thank you for reading that. Then he goes on and says, I've learned that the symbols and themes of the Latter-day Saint endowment are everywhere. All I had to do was look. They're everywhere, I tell you, everywhere. And that's how the apologetic game is played. And that's what they're doing with the Book of Mormon. Any place in the Western Hemisphere, you can find anything, dig up anything. Doesn't make any difference where or what time period. If you can make it match something in the Book of Mormon, then that's proof. That's evidence right there. The Book of Mormon is true. That's the methodology nowadays. We'll take the evidence for wherever we can get it. And now Margaret Barker redux. I say redux because Margaret Barker has been used by Austin before in his Light on Truth letter. And I can't remember exactly which episode it was, but we pretty much dismantle poor Margaret Barker and her reputation. I want to say again, she's a very nice lady. I've had some correspondence with her back when I was a believing Mormon. I've read some of her books. She's a big deal in this area of Mormonism because what she does, first off, she's a scholar. She is a radical scholar, by which I mean that her conclusions are generally not accepted by the broader consensus of scholars in her field. And what she says is that right before Lehi left Jerusalem, she doesn't talk about Lehi, but it's in the early 600s BCE. There's a king named Josiah, who in the Old Testament, it talks about the reforms that Josiah did in the law. Right. From his point of view, the way it's presented in the Old Testament, things had gone to hell, and the Israelites are doing all sorts of crap, and they're worshiping out in the groves, and God knows what they're doing out there in the groves. And so he says, we're not doing that anymore, and we're going to take all this stuff that's been accumulating and all this pagan stuff. We're going to get rid of it. We're going to go back to the way it was originally. That's the way the Bible presents it. What Margaret Barker does, she says, yeah, that's what the Bible says. But actually, what she's going to try and do, kind of like what Don Bradley does with 116 lost pages, is she says, I'm going to look at the Bible and I'm going to look at all these other texts, including especially the first book of Enoch. And I am going to try and reconstruct what it was that was going on in the Jerusalem temple, in the Temple of Solomon, before Josiah got his hands on it. And strangely, what it is that she lists as having been there, once again, it's a reconstruction with which very few agree, except Mormons, because she ends up lining it up with what Mormons believe. So that's why she's so appealing to Mormons and why Mormons per capita buy more of her books than any other religious denomination, me included. And here's what he has to say about her. Can you just read this first paragraph?
Sure. Some biblical scholars, including non-Latter-day Saint Margaret Barker, deduce that King Hezekiah around 750 BC and later Josiah around 620 BC initiated radical reforms to the Israelite religion and temple worship. The group that supported King Josiah in these reforms is called the Deuteronomists and is often credited with shaping the books of Deuteronomy, Judges, Joshua 1, and 2 Samuel, and the 1st and 2nd Kings. The theory is that after the Deuteronomist reforms, the Israelite religion was de-Christianized.
Right. And further down, it says King Josiah's reforms included purging Judah and Jerusalem, purging the groves, carved images, molten images, breaking down altars, etc.
And if I understand correctly, the groves were usually linked to Asherah worship, right? God, Elohim's or El's consort. Is that correct?
Yes, and the Hyros Gamos.
Mm-hmm.
A little Hugh Nibley lingo there for you. Well, he goes on and on and on, right? And he basically puts forth the argument that I have said, which is he's leaning on Margaret Barker to do the heavy lifting of saying, yeah, well, originally in the temple before Josiah, screwed everything up, they actually had the Mormon temple endowment going on in there. That's essentially the argument. So at the bottom, he says, ultimately, this is the huge concession, by the way. Ultimately, we do not know the extent of the changes made during King Josiah's reform or how the temple ceremony changed, which is a huge concession to make in the middle of a section of your chapter where you're trying to show that the Temple of Solomon used to have the Mormon temple endowment going on. No, we don't know. This is all speculation. And this is proper that he put this in here, this concession. I'm mildly surprised that he does, but I wanted to emphasize it.
Isn't it interesting how most apologetic arguments these days are primarily about what we don't know? They're trying to prove how little we know so that their theology can fit in the gaps that remain.
Yeah, I know that it's speculative. We don't know exactly necessarily. We certainly know the spin on it that the Old Testament puts on it, which would obviously be probably pro King Josiah, right?
Yeah, in other words, we have no reason to believe what Austin's trying to do here is basically imply without arguing, because he can't carry the burden on the argument, is that these Deuteronomist reforms removed the LDS temple, like the things that would have been in the original temple ceremony that then are reflected in the LDS temple endowment. Those things were removed because of these Deuteronomist reforms. That's the implicit argument that he's making here.
Yes.
And that's why the temple practices at the time of Jesus and before the time of Jesus don't bear any resemblance to the LDS temple practices when we get to the specifics. That's what he's trying to argue here.
I have to tell you something here, and this is one of the most maybe problematic aspects of the argument, which is, first off, we know that the Old Testament says nothing about Jesus. That Christians came back to the Old Testament and were very creative in how they used the passages in it in order to make it support Jesus.
Right.
And we find that like in the book of Matthew, and thus was it fulfilled by so-and-so saying this.
Right.
And it's very, very creative. But really, the Old Testament doesn't say anything about Jesus, which, when the Book of Mormon enters the scene, now becomes highly problematic because the Book of Mormon has Jesus being preached in Old Testament times among the Nephites. And so why is it then that if the Nephites have it, and by the way, this is a philosophical conclusion, which is that if you have to believe in Christ, once Christ has come and you're a Christian, right? Once Christ has come and you're a Christian, you have to believe in Christ and do something in some way involving Christ to be saved. Well, what about the people who lived before he came? It's an inevitable question that's going to come up. And it's going to be responded to in different ways. Well, they're all fried, but that doesn't seem really fair because they didn't really choose when they were born. But it was very, very common then to start applying this idea. Well, they knew about Jesus too. And the Book of Mormon makes good on that thought and has him declared with great specificity way before he's born and all the main elements of his career and the ministry that Jesus had, as we read about it in the New Testament, is all in the Book of Mormon in Old Testament or pre-Christian times. So what has happened then, even without the Book of Mormon, but especially appealing to Mormons, is that in order to solve this contradiction that they've created by their own theology, which is why is it that even though they must have known about Jesus in the Old Testament times, that we don't read about him in the Old Testament? Well, it's those damn Jews.
Right.
See, this is what came to be the apologetic for why it is that Jesus doesn't show up in the Old Testament, even though he should have, and doubtless was there in the specificity that we have in the Book of Mormon, except the Jews took him out because that's what Jews do, right? They hide this stuff. They're enemies of God. They're enemies of Christ. And so they took it out of the Old Testament. And that becomes one of the things that Margaret Barker hints at. She has a suffering Messiah that they believed in, she says, beforehand. But this is one of the things that is especially attractive to Mormons because of the Book of Mormon and how it talks about Jesus before. So did that make sense? I wanted to talk about that a bit because I think that's significant and problematic, because it's really kind of another instance of latter-day anti-Semitism. So this person, TT, are the initials. Back in 2007, wrote a blog called My Margaret Barker Experience, which I don't believe I covered in the first one. Now, this is a little bit lengthy. I'm just going to have the first few paragraphs here because this person did such a good job of expressing my feelings about Margaret Barker.
Yeah.
And the problems with her research and how it is she goes about it that makes it problematic. And I just want to read a few of these paragraphs. Could you take this first one?
Sure. So this was written November 9th, 2007. It says, I first heard about Margaret Barker 7 years ago, and I have watched from the sidelines as LDS scholars have fallen all over themselves after her ideas. Let me pause there and say the reason this happens so often, we had this happen recently when there was that YouTube channel that supposedly said they found gold plates in Arabia.
The fake gold plates on Shabbat Live.
Yeah. There's this quote I've used before from Carl Sagan that his daughter Sasha Sagan shared in her book. It's dangerous to believe things simply because you wish them to be true. And what this person is describing just in this first sentence in real time is seeing that happen, is seeing that LDS scholars, because they need evidence that doesn't exist to support their beliefs, this is what happens. You're able to fall for grifts or for just really, really bad scholarship because you need some legitimacy to the things you already believe. Anyways.
And this is why Margaret Barker became the doyen of Mormon apologists. I think I'm using that correctly in a sentence. Maybe I pronounced it correctly. The doyen.
I've never heard that reference.
Okay, here we're going to go. We're going to pretend like this is live right here. Actually, I'm going to let you continue reading and I'll look it up. How's that?
Perfect. However, I have never read her work. My avoidance of her work changed when a friend of mine sent me one of her lectures for comment. This is a great way to maintain a long-distance friendship, by the way. It was worse than I imagined. I listened to the 35-minute lecture probably 10 times and just got more frustrated every time. I am slightly embarrassed by this episode of LDS intellectual history. It represents a step backwards in dealing with the contemporary critical evaluation of biblical texts and ancient Near Eastern religion.
Okay.
Another example I would give while you continue to look that up is... Oh, you've got it. Go ahead.
Where are you now here? Did you complete?
I completed.
And the A&E is Ancient Near East. Did you go ahead and say that?
I did.
Okay. So doyen is just the senior member of a body or a group, or a person considered to be knowledgeable or uniquely skilled as a result of long experience in some field of endeavor. So let me see here if I play this. Doyen or doyen. Geez, I don't think I pronounced it correctly. All right. So anyway, that's why she's considered to be that. So did you have any other comments about this particular paragraph?
No.
Right. You just get frustrated listening to her because it's like you're listening to a Mormon apologist. But she's arguing for her particular theory, which once again is radical and not accepted by the majority of scholars in the field. It goes on. The lecture in question is called What Did King Josiah Reform? And that is one of her main things that is just loved by the Mormons. She delivered it at BYU some time ago. The main thesis of the paper is that Josiah's Deuteronomic reforms were a major departure from earlier Israelite temple worship and that many people strongly opposed these changes. This seems perfectly fine and uncontroversial, and I have absolutely no problem with this argument. The problem is in her imaginative reconstruction of this earlier ritual and other religious themes that she thinks were reformed. Your turn, Kolby.
Barker reconstructs earlier Israelite religion as consisting of, among other things, Asherah worship. The temple menorah was the Asherah. Child sacrifice as atonement. The ability to experience a vision of God. The belief that God's son is the God of Israel, I'm going to guess. They meant a Melchizedek priesthood, angel worship, that the temple rooms corresponded to the days of creation, and a scattering of true believers who resisted Josian reforms and maintained authentic worship. It is easy to see why LDS readers are attracted to many of these ideas, though Asherah worship and child sacrifice don't seem all that helpful.
Except for Heavenly Mother.
Yeah, except for when we need it to make a point. But this is exactly the reason that we need to critically investigate these claims. They are too easy. They are essentially too... Oh,
no.
Go ahead.
What are you saying? They're essentially too what?
I just went to start reading. Sorry.
Oh, this is my slide. There are essentially two problems with her argument. First, Barker's historiographical method relies on texts and accounts that are far removed from the historical period she is reconstructing, just like the apologists do. No wonder they love her. Which makes it extremely unlikely that these texts contain reliable historical data because they're so far removed, they're so long after. Second, she is working on a number of hidden assumptions about the consistency of interpretation of pre-Israelite religion. She only has two views of this history. There is an authentic worship, which can be recovered by her, and the Josian reform. This assumption masks the rather obvious fact evident in the texts that she is studying, that there were numerous interpretations of what the authentic version of ancient Israelite religion was.
Oh, can I pause you there and say what this reminds me of very much? So folks probably know that my past practice involved a lot of appellate law, and in fact still kind of do trainings and stuff in that area, have taught in that area before. Very often when you're dealing with appellate issues, you have to do some deep research going back to history, especially when you're dealing with constitutional issues, and look at what the framers of whatever constitutional provision you're talking about likely meant. One of the biggest things I've learned from having worked in that field, read a lot of scholarship in that field, and even argued cases in that field, is it is a complete myth that any group in history spoke univocally or had a univocal view. And what I often use to make this point is I argued a case a few years ago about property tax exemptions in Idaho. Boring. Went all the way up to the Idaho Supreme Court. And as I was working on this case, I had a pair of companion cases that I would reference where the Idaho Supreme Court had interpreted this very specific property tax provision of the Idaho Constitution in two separate 3-2 decisions, saying that the constitutional language meant exactly opposite things. And the reality was they went back to go look at the constitutional, the Idaho Constitutional Convention and debates to make their argument. And this is exactly the point that I experienced in handling that case that this person is making here, that when you go back to history, it is highly speculative on what those people actually meant. And history doesn't speak univocally because there are people on either side of an issue. And I think that's what this author is conveying, that they were recognizing that history is much more complicated and messy than Margaret Barker was making it. And when people want to sell you a very easy vision of history, that it speaks univocally, always usually for what they want it to speak for,
right.
By the way, that's something to be very wary of, whether you're encountering it in religious history or in legal/civic history, I would say.
Yeah, and another but related example of that is very common in political arguments to have somebody say, well, the founding fathers believed that, blah, blah,
Mhm.
blah. Well, the founding fathers believed a lot of things because they did not speak univocally. You got the Federalist
Exactly.
Papers where they're arguing about all sorts of different things. So, yeah, some founding fathers believe this, other founding fathers thought this,
Mhm.
but it sounds more impressive to say the founding fathers as if they all agreed on something when a lot of times they didn't.
Yeah, even if something is the Federalist Papers, people often don't know there were a series of anti-Federalist papers also written by people who helped frame the Constitution of the United States. Those just don't get as much play. But my point here is that if someone's trying to sell you a very simple version of exactly like this author put it, what the authentic version of ancient Israelite religion was, or what the authentic version of what the framers of the Constitution, state or federal, thought, history is just much more complicated than that, exactly like discourse today is. In fact, one of my biggest lessons I've learned as I've looked at the history of constitutions in cases I've handled is that everything that happened, every discussion we have today has been had before, and just in different types and shadows or echoes and illusions, but they're often fighting about the same exact thing. When I was dealing with that big property tax exemption case, one of the big focuses of the Idaho Constitutional Convention was, well, these businesses bring in so much revenue to the state, they shouldn't be taxed. It's the same types of arguments that we hear today,
Yeah.
is my point.
Very good. And they were arguing about baptizing children back in Book of Mormon times too. So I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So he's saying that the two main mistakes Barker makes is, first off, she's quoting in order to establish her principles from texts that are so far after the fact.
Right.
And the second thing is she is simplifying it down to the point where a lot of different people are saying different things about the subject, but she's only picking and choosing certain things in order to restore the authentic way it used to be.
Exactly.
Both of these problems cause her to overlook what is actually interesting about the material that she is studying, namely that diverse ancient religious parties appealed to an idealized view of pre-exilic religion in order to give their own views authority. We're just doing what was done before.
Which, by the way, is the entire reason people invoke the founding fathers also, because the implicit argument is the founding fathers had it right. And I'm not saying they necessarily didn't. I'm just saying that's the only reason you invoke someone else, is you're essentially doing an appeal to authority.
Very good. Now, that was the last thing. It goes on, but I want you to go ahead and look that up. There's enough stuff there for you to Google, I'm sure, and find this article. It's very good, but I didn't want to read the whole thing. And finally, now this is the last section. You can see it's the last section because it's right before he gets to footnotes, where he reads where it's about temple and ancient connections conclusion. You want to read this, Kolby?
I definitely do. Depending on the day, I hear critics say that Joseph Smith was an anti-Mason and that the Gadant and robbers were fashioned after them. The next day, I could hear critics tell me that Joseph loved the Freemasons and plagiarized them.
I'm going to come back to this in a second. But having made that point, okay, he sees this as something that is crazy about people who don't believe in the Book of Mormon, that someday they'll say Joseph Smith was an anti-Mason. Other times they'll say he loved him. No, the Book of Mormon that Joseph Smith produced is very anti-Masonic. That's clear. It's anti-Masonic, and it's about the Gadant robbers as well as other things, but primarily the Gadant robbers who have their secret signs by which they can know each other, right, and commit all sorts of wickedness. But then, by the time Joseph Smith gets to 1842 and the temple endowment, all of a sudden now he's adopting these things from Masonry. How is this possible in as short a time as 13 years, from 1829 to 1842? Now, this is from Wikipedia. I know that it is frowned upon by some people. I'm just going to put it out here, okay? Because I think this is very, very basic history.
Mm-hmm.
The amazing thing is that I haven't changed a word on this, and it completely supports this shift in belief that happened in 1829 and 1842 with Joseph Smith. Because in 1826, William Morgan, as we talked about, disappeared from the small town of Batavia, New York. He was alleged to be kidnapped by Freemasons and murdered after threatening to expose Freemasonry's secrets by publishing its rituals. Morgan's disappearance sparked a series of protests and suspicion against Freemasonry. This is right when the Book of Mormon is being written, which eventually spread to the political realm, etc. this political party that they created, as you mentioned, Kolby, earlier,
Mhm.
this political party ran presidential candidates in 1828 and 1832, but by 1835, the party had disbanded everywhere except Pennsylvania. Okay. So this was a brief flurry of anti-Masonic fury that sparked this party, which was occurring at the time Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon, and which had subsided by the time he gets to the Temple Endowment, which really seems to line up pretty well. What do you think, Kolby?
Yeah, and even if we didn't know this history, which we do, the idea that Joseph Smith's position on anything at the start of his, at the start of his role as prophet of this movement, and then comparing it to his position on things at the end of the movement is just inherently flawed. Like, we know Joseph Smith shifted his opinion on basically everything he held. Charlie Harrell has a great book called This Is My Doctrine, where he goes through in great detail and establishes really that there's not a single fundamental doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that hasn't changed over the course of its history. And most of those changes, I would say, happened at the hands of Joseph Smith revising earlier things that came from Joseph Smith.
And one of the many tensions in Mormonism is the fact that because the Book of Mormon was written in 1829, it has very many anti-Masonic sentiments in it, that a Mormon now reads today. They go to the temple and they say, why is the Book of Mormon being so critical and actually calling, satanic the very same types of ceremonies that we go through in the temple, the secretness, the secret signs, the secret tokens by which one may know another, and all this stuff. So it leads them to have to create, well, there's a bad Masonry, there's a good Masonry,
Right.
And all these kinds of things, simply because Joseph Smith did change his mind along with public sentiment between 1829 Book of Mormon and 1842 Temple Endowment. Now, can you read the rest of that? I interrupted you to make that point.
No, perfect. Yes.
Once again, this is from the concluding statement of Austin Fife.
Right. The reality is that the temple ordinances of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have inexplicable ancient origins that Joseph Smith would not have known about. No, they don't. Plus, temple initiatory and endowment elements were present in Joseph's experience since the first vision. No. During my search for more light and truth, I was astonished at Joseph's ability to restore ancient temple customs and practices. Crediting Joseph's ability to restore ancient traditions solely on Freemasonry is too simple. I agree with that. It is the simple answer. I think there's an epistemological razor about that. Freemasonry does not remotely explain this connection.
Okay, hang on a second, because that's very, very funny. He's actually saying that
I'm
saying
gonna
that
ignore.
Joseph Smith got it from Freemasonry is too simple, and yet that's what Occam's razor tells us we should do.
Yeah. I'm going to ignore the much more simple conclusion and go to the one that I need to because it upholds my theological beliefs.
Can you imagine 2 + 2 = 4? That's just too simple.
Yep.
No, it must be something other than 4.
I know. I'm telling you, we said this during our first episode on this last year. When I first read this letter, I honestly thought it was parody. And we've talked about that a number of times. Poe's law, right? Something that's sufficient.
That's how I learned it, from you.
Yeah. And this is a line that it's like, I don't understand how you could put in there directly, I'm going to look Occam's razor dead in the eyes as it chops me in half. That's just crazy to me.
And by the way, Poe's law, this is the student to the master trying to see if I've learned my lesson. Poe's law is when someone's like writing like this or defending something or something where they are so extravagant in what it is they're claiming that it looks indistinguishable from a parody.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like they're making fun of it.
Yeah. Fundamentalism, taken to its logical extreme, can often be indistinguishable from parody, is the hallmark of Poe's law.
Well, there we go. I knew I could get you to say it correctly if I just gave it a whack. Let me see what else there is. Oh, yeah. So this is what I was writing here on this slide. In other words, anti-Masonry sentiment was at its height when Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon, which seems decidedly anti-Masonic. I think I already said all this. Mm-hmm. But anti-Masonry sentiment had largely subsided by 1835, in plenty of time for Joseph Smith's creation of the Temple Endowment in 1842. 2. And there comes to the end of our slides, except for the fact that we're going to go back to the beginning and use your slides for the conclusion
Perfect.
to this show, because you came up with some great slides and we definitely want to talk about those. Now, did you even see that that's actually the first slide now?
Yeah, I put it back at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go. It's just shifted so you could even tell.
Yeah, and I think this will be a good conclusion, and I've made this point throughout, but the big thing I was struck by as we were finishing preparing these slides is that this is an exercise, Austin's chapter, I mean, and how you talk yourself out of the obvious conclusion. And I kind of just joked about this, but this is why Occam's razor cuts Austin's chapter's argument in half and demonstrates his sloppy conclusion first methodology. So we've already rehearsed this, but as a reminder, Austin's chapter opens by essentially needing to distance the endowment ceremony from Freemasonry. It also needs to make the case that the endowment ceremony is true. And Austin, as he does oftentimes, uses a stand-in for like ancient as true. He uses ancient as a stand-in for true, I mean.
Yes.
And so, in essence, Austin is rejecting one set of parallels in favor of a series of alternative parallels in early Christian rites, ancient Near Eastern rites, Chinese rites, and Egyptian rites.
I like the Chinese rites the best.
Yeah,
that's the most
tasty.
persuasive to me.
Yeah, they're tasty. He says, and just to make clear that I'm not straw manning what he's doing here. We've already read this, but I'll just read it quickly. He says, the reality is that the endowment has as many, if not more, connections to ancient temple traditions and coronation ceremonies as it does to Freemasonry. Why do critics emphasize the Freemasonry connections and completely ignore the more substantial ancient connections? And so, in line with our earlier episode where I talked about falsifiability, or we talked about falsifiability together, I looked at that and said, I wonder if I could do any type of actual analysis on how substantial these connections are. So would you go to the next slide, please?
Absolutely.
So here's what I did. I generated a list of 15 unique elements of the endowment. And when I say unique, I don't mean things like using the name Jesus Christ, because if it's something in my mind that you could hear at an average LDS testimony meeting or seminary or a standard Sunday school lesson, that's not unique elements of the endowment. I'm talking about the things that are unique about the LDS temple practices that aren't shared by other just general LDS practices. So I came up with a list of 15. The tokens and handshakes, the use of a new name, the washing and anointing, the prayer circle, special garments, a veil ceremony, health and or death penalties, signs and keywords, dramatic presentation, symbolic compass and square, a sacred embrace, altar covenant making, passing angels or gatekeepers, baptisms for the dead, which Austin really didn't talk about except in that introductory paragraph, and eternal marriage or sealing, which he also didn't really talk about. So that made me say, if we've got
remember,
this,
King Benjamin's speech talks about the eternal marriage or sealing.
It definitely talked about the eternal marriage or sealing. Definitely. So that made me think, if I've got this list of 15 unique elements, and Austin is running this comparison, although without actually running a comparison, to Freemasonry, early Christian practices, ancient Near Eastern practices, Chinese and Egyptian practices, what would the math on this actually look like? So I did that. I compared to each of these different sets with this list of 15 unique elements.
And I want to see that, but using your logic, the thought did cross my mind that here we got the Book of Mormon that has the endowment all over it, as Austin has showed us, but no mention of baptism for the dead for some reason.
Oh, isn't that weird?
It's odd.
Yeah, funny that.
And here we go to your analysis, which is fantastic.
Yeah, so here's the analysis, and this is more so that people can check my math that we'll cover on the next slides, but here's the unique elements of the LDS Temple versus the claimed parallels in Austin's chapter to these other comparison groups. So you can see along the bottom there, I've got Freemasonry, the ancient Near Eastern rites, Egyptian rites, the Chinese rites, and the early Christian rites. The green boxes then indicate whether that practice is present in that comparison class. So you can see I've got a green box in Freemasonry on tokens and hand class, the new name, the washing and anointing, the special dress, the veil ceremony, health and death penalties, signs and keywords, dramatic presentation format. I won't do them all, but the bottom line is, as you look at those, where do you see the most most overlap are.
By the way, for those who can't read, because it might be a little small on their screen, the first column is Freemasonry. The second column is ancient Near Eastern rites. The third column is Egyptian rites. The fourth column is Chinese legends, which only has one box out of all of them marked as a hit. And finally, early Christian rites. You know, early Christian rites seems to have more than any of the others. I think early Christian rites is the source of the temple endowment.
Yeah, early Christian rites and Freemasonry are actually a tie. So if you go to the next slide, I'll show you that I realized that was just, as I ran that comparison, I realized that was really just comparing the number of parallels. It didn't consider this thing that we've talked about throughout this comparison we've done of the level of specificity.
Yes.
So if you go to the next slide.
And I'll add availability, but you're probably going to get to that.
I actually didn't deal with availability because I think it's just obvious.
But let me just add it there.
Yes,
Sometimes stating the obvious is important because one set was available to Joseph Smith. The other was not, unless you are going to believe he received it supernaturally. But why have a supernatural explanation when a natural explanation will do as well, or as you're going to show, even better?
Exactly. So as I thought about the level of specificity, I started to think about Freemasonry and the LDS endowment and the overlap here. There is strong, well-documented evidence that multiple elements of the Nauvoo era endowment match Masonic ritual forms in exact detail, not just broad thematic parallels. And I had 3 that are very specific, and we've already talked about these, so I'll just hit the high points, which is the handshakes and tokens, the signs and keywords, and the penalties. Again, as we've talked about, not only are these very direct matches, they include the sequence of the use of the same handshakes and tokens and the verbal exchanges. You are muted. Yes, I got to say that in this episode.
Yes, thank you. And the same sequence of the penalties as well.
Exactly. So not only do we have a much more specific overlap here, we have the sequence, I think, cannot be ignored. If you'll move to the next slide. Since this was these were our other comparison classes, the leading one being early Christians, I have here parallels to early Christian or ancient temple rites are generally conceptual rather than procedural, right? They don't include the specific sequence. Early Christian writings do describe hand clasps, new names, and passwords, but they are single elements, not a sequential system. They lack the exact choreography and verbal pairings of the Masonic LDS sequence. The ancient Near Eastern and Egyptian rites often share themes. And as I said, one of those themes, creation narrative, every mythology in the world ever includes a creation narrative. You could even say that viewing the world as a materialist scientist incorporates a creation narrative just in the idea of the Big Bang, right? Yeah. That just goes to show how meaningless that parallel is, and that they are common, as it says here, across many cultures, and they lack this documented line-by-line procedural match that we see with Freemasonry and the endowment. And the Chinese parallels that he pointed to, as we already talked about, the compass and square, are not just symbols, they have practical uses. And so it should be entirely unsurprising that those artifacts that have practical uses then reflect that practical use in rituals. That's how human minds work. I don't know how to explain this at a more basic level. It's
and the compass and square are famous for building things.
Exactly.
Like building the world or the cosmos.
Exactly. And I mean, like, the use of the square is literally in the name, right? It's used to make right angles. And so it should be entirely unsurprising that it's used to also talk about right behavior. If you'll move to the next slide, I ran more numbers. So taking that into consideration, I then ran this analysis, which shows specific tiers of parallels to LDS temple elements, highlighting exact versus conceptual matches. And what I mean by this is, so for people who are listening, I've got several columns, again, like we did on the slide before. This time we've got Freemasonry, the ancient Near Eastern rites, Egyptian rites, Chinese rites, and early Christian rites. But instead, these bar graphs are filled up with different colors. And what these different colors represent is not just that we have a match, but how specific that match is. So the matches that are in gray are the lowest level of specificity. They represent a match of broad symbolic forms or a grand concept, a broad concept. The orange matches then move to moderate specificity, like a unique single ritual element. We then move to tier 1 conceptual matches, which are our brighter orange. Those are high specificity, but they're still just a conceptual match. And then we get to tier 1, our exact matches, or our very, very close matches, which are in red, which identify our multi-step sequence or features. So again, we've already talked about this, but the Masonic grips and penalties don't only match, they match the sequence as well. And so when we look at this breakdown, we can see that while early Christian rites and Freemasonry have the same number of parallels, the parallels for Freemasonry, we have 3 of them that are basically exact or near exact matches, while in early Christian rites, we don't have any of that. In fact, we don't have any red matches in any of these other comparison classes that Austin has pointed to. And remember his claim here that these were the more substantial ancient connections. We can see that really this is just a demonstrably untrue claim that Austin has made here.
Well, what if you take Freemasonry and then you take the ancient Near Eastern rites and put it on top of the Egyptian rites and put it on top of the Chinese tradition and then put all that on top of the early Christian rites? Don't you have a much taller tower there for graph and comparison purposes?
Well, you would, unless those things are also overlapping amongst all of them, which they are, right? And so that then makes our point that the parallels that are shared by all of the comparison classes, if we're really thinking critically, should probably be thrown out the window, because if they're that universal, we're really probably not looking at evidence of anything other than these broad thematic, almost universal stories, right? Like this idea that having the creation myth worked into a rite is some compelling hit. That's how mythology works for everything. We literally have a name for this in anthropology. They're called etiological myths or stories. They're found across every single culture. And so really, we should throw them out. And especially, we shouldn't follow them. We shouldn't find those more compelling than these high level of specificity matches between Masonry and the LDS Temple endowment.
Right. Just so stories like Rudyard Kipling wrote, but of course he did it more whimsically, but it's a way to describe why things are the way things are.
Right.
That's the etiological story. E-T-I-O?
E-T, I think it's I-O.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a Y in there. Etiological. No. Okay. Yeah, it's I.
I
think if you'll go to the next slide, I
got to ask you a question about this. Some
Sure.
in the audience may be wondering, and the thought had crossed my mind.
Sure.
How did you come up with these categories and assigning different things to different categories? Did you do that yourself, or how did you come up with these different colors?
Oh, the colors were a result of me looking at that first graph we looked at with the green boxes and saying the numbers aren't the only thing we should be caring about here. It's not just yes. So that, I think that next slide really illustrates, as I looked at that green slide, I was sitting there going, okay, well, this helps make the point that I think is right, but it's also ignoring the specificity element. And so it was an evolution of this first idea of, oh, Austin says that there are more connections and that there are more compelling connections than these other comparison classes rather than Freemasonry. Let's actually run the numbers and see what that looks like. And that's where I then generated the 15. So this all relates to itself. It's an evolution over time.
And I'm being not asking a clear enough question. How did you make the determination as to what was an exact match versus a conceptual match versus moderate specificity versus low specificity?
I looked at the chapter and looked at the things that he was comparing to. And really, I mean, yeah, there is there is a subjective element to this and how you categorize them. I think that's where then especially on the specific matches, the things that fall in red on this graph, that's why I had them illustrated on that earlier slide so that people can check my math at least on there. Yeah, I'm sorry, go forward to this right here. These are the 3 that fall in that red box: the handshakes and tokens, the signs and keywords, and the penalties. So each of the comparison classes are being compared to that list of 15 things. And I'm taking Austin's, and here's the other thing about that. I'm taking the representation in Austin's chapter at face value. I'm not even questioning, as we've gone throughout this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even questioning the legitimacy of some of his hits. I'm taking them at face value. As I jokingly texted you while I was preparing, appellate attorneys don't fight about the facts. We fight about the law. And so I think I have this natural inclination to want to take someone's factual assertions at face value and then explain to them why they're still wrong. And that's what this analysis is born out of, is taking Austin's representations of the parallels at face value and then incorporating my concept of the specificity on these three things.
Although we do have to acknowledge that this first column related to Freemasonry would not exist at all based upon Austin's book. It's only because we've taken the time to present them where he did not.
Correct.
All right. Is there anything else here? Oh, I love this one. Tell us about this picture.
So this, to me, I just had a lot of fun making this picture, and I wanted to share it because we've got our little friend Austin there riding a tentacled monster.
I can tell by his cheeks; they're so rosy.
And the background. Please tell me you get a giggle out of that.
And the background, it's so funny. Yeah, right. He's in the laundry room. That's beautiful. I love it.
Yes.
Why is he riding an octopus?
Well, on the octopus are written the words confirmation bias. And I think this chapter, almost more than any other, because of the way he juxtaposed rejecting the Freemasonry parallels to then go and find these much less compelling parallels, I think, to any reasonable observer. What we've got here is Austin writing this monster labeled confirmation bias. He's pointing and saying, there to my conclusion. And what I'm trying to communicate is that Austin is overlooking the much more obvious, the much simpler conclusion to get to the much more speculative conclusion. So you can see the tentacled monster that he's writing is reaching over bigger objects to get to the smaller objects in the back. So the objects in this kind of analogy, or way to understand what he's doing methodologically in this chapter, is he's rejecting the much stronger, much more obvious pieces of evidence to go find the much more specious, the much more speculative,
remote, recondite, unlikely.
Exactly. Because he already has the conclusion in mind. And that's the point, is he already has the conclusion in mind. So he needs to find evidence to support the conclusion, even if he has to wade right past the much more obvious and compelling evidence to get to the evidence that he needs to make his argument.
So is that a Christmas tree ornament, or is that a tin can on top of an orange? I'm not exactly sure.
I'm not sure. I just really like claymation stuff. And so it's very fun for me to have it done in claymation style.
Well, I love it. I think that might be, oh no, it's not quite the last slide. You've got another poke at Austin. His wife's going to be really mad at you, I can tell you.
So I'll read his contention one more time after we've just talked about this evidence. Why do critics emphasize the Freemasonry connections and completely ignore the more substantial ancient connections? And I've got a meme clip here from Thor Ragnarok, one of my favorite Marvel movies, where Thor says to Bruce Banner, "Is it though?" And the point here being, are they really the more substantial ancient connections, or are these ancient connections actually the more substantial ones? Not to my eyes, and not to the analysis I ran.
It's really funny that it's funny again. It strikes me as funny again that he is going to argue by assertion, another famous logical fallacy, because he's not putting the information in front of the reader. He's not putting the Freemasonry connections, the Masonic connections in front of the reader,
right?
And then arguing it's more substantial for not being Freemasonry, but for being the ancient Near East, right? He's doing it by assertion. He won't tell you what the connections are with Freemasonry. And yet he'll try and convince you that ancient Near East is better anyway.
Because he needs to.
He needs to. He has to. Because, he's looking for light and truth. And this is the way you find light and truth, is by hiding the evidence that contradicts your position.
That's right.
Right, Austin? Oh, that's going to get me a poison pen letter. Okay. So I think that was it. So let me go back to just you and me. It's time for closing statements. I love the Marvel movie reference. I appreciated that better than anything else in this whole production, I got to tell you. Although, once again, when I was putting all this together, man, those connections between the Mormon temple and the Masonic temple and ritual and clothing and hand clasp and penalties and the 5 points of fellowship, it's kind of overwhelming. There,
Mhm.
you know, Masonry has a lot of symbols and hand clasp and stuff that Mormonism does not have in the temple.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, almost everything that Mormonism uses in the temple is found in Masonry
Mhm.
or very close derivations of it. There's only one point that may not be in the Masonic temple that is in the Mormon temple, and that's the first token of the Melchizedek priesthood. But when you conceptualize it and think about it, then it's kind of obvious, you know what I mean? Especially when you're dealing with this milieu, as Joseph Smith was, of all the hand clasps that they have and what they can mean and, you know, all this stuff. But I think with that one exception, I mean, is there anything else in the Mormon temple that is not also in the Masonic temple?
Hmm.
I know you got to think about it. I mean, women, right? Women's one thing, and that really pissed the Masons off at Joseph Smith for including women in.
To be fair, we do move them to one side, so
And it is the left side, but only if you're looking at it from the audience. If you're up there at the temple looking at the congregation, a fine congregation, as they used to say in the pre-1990 endowment. Actually, I think it was Satan Lucifer who said that. A fine congregation. It was either that or the Protestant
Pretty
minister
true.
that they
Yeah.
totally got rid of. Then they're on the right. So it just depends on how you look at it. But other than that, I mean, it's kind of all there. It's all derived. Now, the story is different. And what I want to say is about the LDS Temple Endowment is Masonry overlaid with the creation and the fall of Adam and Eve, right? That story, and put in the context of the 3 degrees of glory, because that's the levels that you're advancing from and to. That's kind of it. There really isn't a whole lot else in the endowment that isn't derived from one of those sources. And interestingly, I'll conclude with this. Okay, we're going to try and keep this to 3 hours. So you might be just a little bit over already, but we're going to try and keep it to 3 hours, okay? Because I think this is significant. Is we know that Joseph Smith, he gets made a Mason in March 1842, and then in May of 1842, he ends up giving the first endowment to people, okay, in the second floor of his red brick store.
Right.
In those same 2 months, March and May of 1842, are being published in the Times and Seasons, the Mormon periodical, the contents of the Book of Abraham, first in March and second in May, for the whole thing, together with, you know, the facsimiles. So Joseph Smith definitely has that on his mind. And one of the main things that happens in the Book of Abraham is the last 2 chapters, which nobody talks about. We always talk about the first 3 and usually number 3 chapter when we're talking about the Book of Abraham in the church. But the last 2 chapters are the creation account. It's actually Genesis 1 and 2, reworked for Abraham 4 and 5. And the thing that is remarkable about it is that what Joseph Smith is doing in those chapters, the main thing he's doing is wherever it says, and God created, it says, and the gods. It makes it plural in every instance. This is from his understanding as he understood it, that Elohim could be used to represent a plurality of gods and not just as an honorific title for the singular God. So he translates it as the gods in every instance in chapter 4 and chapter 5 of Abraham. It's on his mind. It comes out the same month as the Temple Endowment, which spends an inordinate amount of time, I must say, a really, really long point of time. I think everybody who's been to the temple knows how long this point of time is in the creation account. And it's just like, oh my gosh, will you ever stop creating things, guys? We know the story.
It's 7 days.
It is. It's like it's really 7 days. That's how long it seems.
Real time.
Because you've got the 3 gods who are represented. So they are actually really physically present in front of you. What he's now added to the creation account in his Book of Abraham. And I see that as an important connection between what he's doing with his scripture and what he's doing with his ritual in the temple endowment, and both of which are coming from his understandings about Hebrew and things like that. Things that are almost certainly incorrect, and yet they were his opinions at the time, and we see them showing up in these different places. So I think that was one of the the big sources for the content of the temple endowment, being the creation. Of course, what comes after that? We got the fall and everything. And we're not going to have just men, and they're not going to be portraying the character of Hiram Abiff, the Mason at Solomon's Temple. No, we got men and women. They will represent Adam and Eve as they go through this particular journey and receive all the tokens and signs the same way the Masons did. Anything else before I take us out of here, Kolby?
Well, the one thing I would say, because I know in this episode, and we covered this in the introduction, the temple is very meaningful to people. It's very sacred to people. It was very meaningful and sacred to me at times in my life. I think the one thing I would say is that we're not trying to make light of any of these things. We are not trying to take away from the meaning or the value that people derive from this place or from these rituals. But if we're thinking critically and we're looking at what Austin claimed, and we're looking at someone who willingly skirts around an obvious conclusion staring them dead in the face because of their theological need to get to a much more unlikely conclusion, right? To really just spurn Occam's razor, the idea of Occam's razor. I think that's what we're talking about today, really, when we get down to the bones of this discussion that we've had. And I think it's an interesting meta point to talk about these methodological differences, right? When we're thinking critically, we're looking at like these things in more detail, and it takes a lot of time. I think that's one of the things that's been surprising to me. I chatted with someone this week about this series that we've done, or actually it was last week, but what the person said to me, they don't listen to like ex-Mormon podcasts. And I won't talk about exactly who, because I know you know who I'm talking about, because I've told you this story, who I was talking to. This person said that they clicked on one of our videos on this Light and Truth letter, saw that it was 4 hours and thought we were unhinged and crazy, started listening to it, and then they texted me later and said, I'm now on my 4th episode because you guys are going through in such great detail and are being so clear about laying all of this out. I think that methodological difference, I want to highlight it because I don't want people to think we're doing this to be mean or to take meaning or value from their lives and the things that they find religiously valuable. The thing I would just wish, especially from these apologists, is that they would stop trying to act like the conclusions they've reached are the evidently true ones, right? Making the claims like Austin did that these are the more substantial connections. Because when they do that, instead of just focusing on their personal value or the utility they find in the church or in whatever religious belief it is, it then makes people like us who are skeptics feel like we have to advocate against their claims. And it's not about that. It's about standing up for what's true, standing up for the most obvious conclusion, and helping the people who are on the other side of this faith divide feel like they're not crazy for not accepting, these contentions from these apologists. So I think that would be my closing thought. I would also just say how much I've enjoyed doing this series with you, even though it is a lot of work on both of our parts.
Boy, isn't it though? My gosh, I had no idea.
Yeah. But I'm really glad like this record of these conversations exists, to just demonstrate how people think about these claims. I hope that people have gotten value, the same value that I've derived from having these conversations, in having them be out there and allowing people to listen to them.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it very much too. I don't think we're quite done yet. There's still a little more that has to be covered so that they can stop saying that we haven't read the whole letter, because obviously, if we haven't read the whole letter, there's still stuff we haven't covered, then there might be some really incredible proof in what's left.
That's right.
I think that's probably going to happen.
We're going to finish this letter, and then we're going to figure out some way to go Jacob Hansen into that freaking debate. That's our next goal.
And you know something, I got to tell you, it was very funny because you keep saying the letters addressed to the critics, the ones that he refuses to talk with. I went back, and as I was looking it up, to find the chapter 10 to cover today, I go through that first page, and yes, it says, "Dear critics."
Mhm.
It's the opening page. Dear critics, it's the opening words. Dear critics, it is literally addressed to you. It's literally addressed to me, and he doesn't want to talk about it.
Mhm.
He wrote a letter that covers it. Well, anyway, I guess he has the courage of his convictions. I just wanted to say in closing, once again, I really appreciate you and your time, Kolby. It's
Mhm.
absolutely fantastic talking with you about these things. It brings insights to me I wouldn't have had, and I think I already highlighted one that you came up with. It was an insight that you were surprised by too, that came to you on the spur of the moment. I just want to, in closing, focus on his saying that thinking that the parallels with the temple are too close to the ones in Freemasonry, and therefore it's derived from Freemasonry. That's too simple, is what he said. That's too simple. By which he actually means, and I don't think I'm being pejorative here, he means it's too likely. Too simple means it's too likely that Joseph Smith got it from Freemasonry.
Mhm.
Therefore, let's go to these really unlikely sources and say that's where he got it from. I think that's what his whole chapter is about. So thank you again very much. Thank you, Austin, for writing this letter. Once again, we do want to, as we've done about 100 times before now, invite you to come on the show with Kolby and Radio Free Mormon. That's me, referring to me in the third person. Come on the show and talk to us about your letter that you addressed to us in the first place when you said, Dear Critics. And we just want to ask you some questions. And it shouldn't be too surprising because it probably won't be different than the questions we've already talked about in all these different episodes that we've had. We want to ask you some questions and get your take on things and find out how you think about things really. Okay. So, for instance, one of the things I might ask you, just so you know, okay, I might ask you, why was it that when you did chapter 10 about the temple and ancient connections, why is it that you talked about Freemasonry, but you didn't go into any kind of detail at all about the similarities between Freemasonry and the LDS temple? Why didn't you do that? That would be a very simple question. I'm sure you'd have a perfectly good answer for it. So come on the show. The red carpet is rolled out. The light is on. It's up to you. You're welcome here. Just contact me at Radio Free Mormon 1. That's the number one. Radio Free Mormon 1 at gmail.com. And I haven't seen a response yet. It's been months since we made this initial invitation and several times since then, but I haven't seen anything from you. So maybe you're forgetting the one. Okay. It's Radio Free Mormon 1 at gmail.com. All right. So I look forward to hearing from you and having you on the show. And I look forward to seeing everybody else here, hopefully next week for another episode of Radio Free Mormon. Thanks again, Kolby. This is Radio Free Mormon signing off the air.